Good evening, everybody. If we were in West Goshen, everybody would have a seat, but we're in East Goshen, and the room is only so big, so I gotta apologize. That's my phone apologizing. I apologize to all the people that have to stand. So let us get going, and I will lay out what we're going to do as quickly as possible so we can get to your comments, because I believe that's probably why you're here in the first place. So we will do that. I'll kind of explain some ground rules, and we'll go from there. So if everybody would rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag in a moment of silence, I appreciate it. I'll lead us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing. A moment of silence for the brave men and women that protect this great nation. Give them the fortitude to continue doing that, and Godspeed to those that have given their lives for the protection of us. Thank you.
I'm sure everybody knows that, or I hope everybody knows that this is a special meeting, one subject matter, although we have to take questions, or we have to by law, take questions with respect to things that aren't on the audience, but I'm going to do that at the end of the meeting. Just if anybody wants to stay, if they have some questions besides what the subject matter is tonight, we'll be happy to address them. I know there's a lot of people here that don't have any idea who we are up here, so I just want to take 5 seconds to run them down here, let everybody know who everybody is. I'll start with John. I do have to mention though, we are live streaming, and it is one way out, not they can't come back in. Now, what's important about that is we up here must remember to use our microphones, because it's the only way that those out in the streaming world can hear us. With the residents that are going to would like to say make any comments, you have to do it on that microphone, and you have to get pretty close to the speaker in order to be heard. And that is very important. When you get there, I'd like 3 people at a time to stand up over here. That way we can keep track of how many people want to speak. When it's your turn, if you live in East Goshen, clearly state your name and street address. If you don't live in East Goshen, clearly state your name, street address, and the township that you live in, so we can put those in the minutes, which we're required to do. If you go real fast and we can't understand your name and address, we'll have to have it said again, because John has to capture it and put it in the minutes of the meeting. So that's what the game plan is for coming up to the mic. Now, as far as the board is concerned, John, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm John Altrule. I'm the Assistant Township Manager, the Director of Finance, and the humble recording secretary tonight.
And I'm David Schuman. My microphone is still broken. I'm Township Supervisor.
I'm Mike Lynch, Township Supervisor.
Why don't you change it, see if you can hear me. I'm Marty Shane, I'm Chairman of the board this year.
Carmen Batavio, Vice Chair and Fire Marshal.
We are short one person tonight. Well, we're short a couple people actually. But Janet Emanuel would be sitting next to Carmen as the 5th supervisor, but unfortunately she's quite sick and has been for a couple of weeks. On vacation, there are 2 people that they're relatively important to this, but they have the right to vacation also. And that is Mark Gordon, our zoning officer, and Rick Smith, our township manager. So if you see these empty seats, that's kind of why. So we welcome everybody here. It's wonderful to see somebody in the room. Now that we stream, we have anywhere like 4 or 5 people here. Sometimes, and I think he's here tonight somewhere, we have 1 person in the room, which is kind of interesting. And just so you know, if you ever want to see what's going on with our meetings, you can either go to YouTube and look at them live, like what's going on now, or later, all you have to do is go to YouTube and find out the address, and you can do it at your heart's convenience. So if anybody would like to see themselves or hear themselves tonight, you can go home and you can go home and on YouTube and find us out after it's uploaded tomorrow. So that's how we do that there. With respect to so many people here, I'm going to ask, to the extent possible, we have had a lot of communication with some of the people in the room. I don't know them all, I know some of them. That's fine, you're certainly welcome to go again. If there are groups of people that have the same issue, I would appreciate if there would be a spokesman for the group, because we really like to get everybody to say something tonight that would like to, because that is important for us. What is really important, whether you're for or against or whatever, your rationale, your reasons for your position are more important to us than the position itself, because we have made no decision. This is a workshop in effect. We're trying to get input to see what residents that are directly affected feel about this. So it is very important to get the reasons that you feel the way you feel. Hello. So with that said, as you, I hope everybody knows, about a year or so ago, and 9 months I guess it's been since the folks got actually going, we had a planning exercise undertaken because there was one of the property owners that asked about how they might develop the property and what they could get on it, where they could put whatever the homes that they were, where they could put whatever the homes that they were planning and so forth and so on. And we tasked the planning commission with a planning exercise to find out what we might do with these lots that are over 40 acres and there's only 4. In order to do that, we need to hire a consultant, which we did, which is Tom Committed. Tom has worked with us since 1981 on various and sundry things, including more recently the Penalty Plate Trail, the Penalty Plate Corridor, the work that was done in the park along with Jason Lang, our Director of Park and Recreation, and we'll be doing other things for us. He's been in the business for years, probably 40 some odd years. So we have the results of what they did tonight. This is the supervisors collectively are seeing the results of this for the first time. Tom will make a brief remarks, and then we will open it up to questions that you may ask of Tom or you may ask of the board. But I want everybody to know before people start leaving that there has been no decision made by the board. There will be no decision, there may be a decision tonight about how to get additional information, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But that even at that, that decision is not to approve or disprove anything. It's to get the information so we can use it, and because there's some things still to be done, if in fact this is even to be considered one way or the other. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Tom Committa, our consultant, and he will show you how close you have. He will probably have to turn on the mic.
It's on, Tom.
It's on,
Yeah,
John.
Tom.
How close you have to get.
You have to be about 6 inches from the mic. Or you can take it out if you want.
Okay, very good.
Hold it, you can pull it out.
Good, thanks, Carmen. Excuse me. Good evening. Hi, I'm Tom Committa. I'm a town planner and landscape architect from Westchester. And as Marty said, I've been working with the township since 1981. My first assignment back then was to do the revised park master plan, and it was adopted by the board in 1982. And since then, I've worked on about 15 projects for the township. About 6 months ago, the township invited me to evaluate some ideas that were fermenting. And I guess about 30 years ago, the ordinances in East Goshen were amended to allow different forms of compact development. And so over the years, neighborhoods like Bow Tree, Clock Tower Woods, Hershey's Mill Estates, Marydale Farms, Sorrel Hill were developed under ordinances that were adopted some years ago. One set of options turned on whether you had 8 acres or more, and the other one, whether you had 20 acres or more. So about 6 months ago, the township said, let's take a look at this again. What do you think about studying properties 8 acres and larger? And I said, I don't think that that's a reasonable threshold. I thought it was more reasonable to think of properties that were in the 20-plus acre range. And so Mark Gordon and the mapping staff produced the map that you've seen online, it's in the back and so forth. And as pointed out in some of the literature, there only happen to be 4 properties that fall under that category. All the while, in the last 30 or 35 years on any of the neighborhoods, the maximum yield that anyone could obtain was 1 dwelling unit per acre. So if you actually look at what the density is for Bow Tree, Clock Tower Woods, Searches Mill Estates, Murraywood Farms, Sorrel Hill, or whatever, it's 1 unit to the acre. And I said, when I was asked what I thought about the possibility that there would be a quote-unquote bonus above 1 unit to the acre, I said we would have to meet at East High School auditorium because so many people would be opposed to that. I basically worked from 1961 to 72 at my grandfather's plant nursery on Green Hill Road. So I've been in East Goshen Township for a lot of years, and with great affection and respect for the township, I didn't think I would ever be able to stand in front of a group like this and ever sell an idea that you would be willing to buy that would have a bonus density. And the reason that it was entertained was the extent to which a site might have significant natural or historic resources were items that the township staff asked me to look at and thought, did they rise to the level that if you protected these historic or natural resources, that in exchange you would get some type of reward? And I would say, well, you might somewhere else. But I remember about 7 or 8 years ago when I was interviewed to revise the township comprehensive plan, Marty asked me as the first question at the interview that I think East Goshen Township was a premier community. And I said, not yet. And I would say that 5 and 10 years from now, because I think the best thing about East Goshen, is that you're in this great landscape, this wonderful environment, and you're all here tonight because of the reason that you were attracted to this condition, one that I have great admiration and affection for. So I thought if we picked 8 acres and above, we would have 1,000 people come out. If we would pick a bonus density above 1 unit to the acre, we would have 2,000 people come out. And I said, time out. We have to be density neutral, just like all the ordinances have been over the years. Second, we have to look at the extent to which you could actually create bona fide open space. The ordinances now require 55% open space. If this is going to be a good outcome, I even said, well, maybe the open space percent would increase to 60%. As Marty pointed out, the purpose of this meeting is to hear your comments. The board's not going to pass anything, vote on anything, make any decisions tonight, so they're anxious to hear what you have to say. But in terms of the big elephant in the room, the threshold issue that we're here about tonight is the housing type. And so I was asked about 6 months ago, what did I think about townhomes? And I said, not really a very good idea, because I didn't think that housing type would fit into like a lot of the neighborhoods where you would sit. And so I said, when you look at the classic Chester County house that grew over the years from like 1840 to 1940, a lot of smaller homes had an addition in one or another direction, and you might have a house that's about 90 to 110 feet wide. And I said, whatever the housing type is, it should not look any different than that. So it could either be a large single-family home, it could be a home that looked like a single-family home but had 2 units in it, or 3. And the reason I said that is because I was asked, what did I think about dwelling units where you had 4, 5, 6, and 7? And I said, it's not appropriate. And so I was asked, well, where are there other places that have successfully achieved an outcome where they had 2 or 3 homes attached that looked like a single-family detached home? So I mentioned, so our firm, Thomas Commit Associates, is currently the planning consultant to 23 municipalities in Pennsylvania, one of which is Kennet Township. So many years ago in Kennet Township, the ponds at Woodward, south of Route 1, on the west side of Route 52, was created, and the farm was pick your own apple orchard, the old farmhouses, daycare center, and the homes are so-called triplex, only 3 houses under one roof. Another neighborhood that I'm familiar with in Rose Valley Borough is called Traymore. So you could kind of Google Traymore, you could go to Google Images, and you would find another example in the Delaware Valley where a municipality had to think about additional housing types. And you could be the judge as to whether you think the Traymore homes are attractive or not. They're very nice. I mean, you can look at them. So because of, I think, the concern for building type, your concern for inducing density, some of the points that were raised in a little handout out front that I didn't prepare, which is, will it increase traffic, or what does it do with the economics, or whatever. I think net, if the open space for anything like this is 55 or 60%, that there are no more homes than you would normally be able to build under any circumstances, then what we'd like you to tell us about is what you think about the idea of having, in addition to single-family homes, the ability to have 2 or 3 houses under one roof, assuming that, again, there would be no more homes than you could normally build. Another option was something that Schuylkill Township asked me about 12 years ago. It's on the Reeves Tract at the Pickering Reservoir, where Todd Poley built the homes. And as you know, Todd performs at our events in the park pro bono as a musician. Todd always built the $1 million home in Radnor and Villanova and so forth. But owing to the ordinance there, I suggested to Todd that he consider what I call the Lilliputian Sweetheart Cottage dollhouse. And in fact, at the Reeves Tract, the houses are these little single-family detached homes. They're on smaller lots than Schuylkill ever built. And I saw Todd at one of the events at the park, and he said, when I recommended this to him about 10 years ago, he said, "That's a crazy idea, Tom. No one would ever buy them." And then he said to me about 3 years ago, "I should have built them all like that. They sold like hotcakes. They also sold for a lot of money." And the reason I mention that is, in terms of housing type, if we probably took a survey of all the houses that you live in, they're probably different heights, different widths, different depths, and so forth. And I think the, so to speak, archaeological dig that would have to happen, should the board decide to pursue this, would be to actually craft important design standards. So I did a report, and it's the one that's on the screen, on the website, and so forth. I just want to go to the last section of the report that I did, which I basically said, if, big if. And after we hear your comments and sleep on it, you know, the board can decide whether it goes to the next step or not. If the board says it doesn't, then you could just do what you've been able to do, you know, the last 30 years. If the board says go to the next step, all that means is they would consider inviting the staff to write an actual amendment that would say, well, what would be the new ground rules? But in my 45 years of practice, I have written over 150 zoning ordinances, and in the last 25 years, I've written probably more ordinances in Pennsylvania with design standards than any person that I am aware of. And so what I said is, if the board decided to pursue this to the next level, New design, so I'm now going to read from 7.9 of my report of September 25th. New design standards could pertain to the arrangement of dwelling unit types, the types of thoroughfares and streetscapes, the arrangement of usable open space, the building types themselves in terms of the widths, the height, the roof lines, the windows, the materials, colors, and setback and buffer standards. Because I felt, no matter what your opinion is on any of the existing neighborhoods, and some of you may live in the ones that I mentioned, if someone's going to do a compact development, out of respect for the neighbors, I think there should be a very generous setback, sometimes the extent to which you wouldn't even see it. So that's kind of the overview, and I think the most important thing is it's your meeting and your opportunity to talk. So as Marty said, if you come up, tell us your name and address. I gave up my seat, so please stay there, Tom. No, you stay there. I'm gonna, if the board will allow me, I'd like to sit up here, and
$100 fee.
yes, very good. But yeah, any comment is a good comment, and you know, two heads are better than one. There were about 12 of us who met about 6 times to go around the table on all of the issues that we had to wrestle with, and you know, we took it to the level of let's take it this far. Let's hear what you have to say. Let's reflect on that, and then we'll decide what to do. So please come up and share your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Go ahead up, line up in threes over there, please, and then we'll get started in just a second. I do want to suggest there is, I hope, still some copies outside of a frequently asked questions that we put together that answer a lot of the questions that some of you have raised. I'm not suggesting that you use that as the be-all and end-all, but it does enable you to take home some information that you can look over. The critical thing here tonight is that all we're doing at this stage of the game is recommending a modification to one of the, I think it's 3 ordinances in the ordinance book with respect to how a development that's in the R2 district can be developed. And this is just the last one of the ones that have been approved over time, and it's called the single-family open space development. And all it would do is increase the opportunity at the same density to put in 2 or 3 units under the same roof. That's all it does. That's all we're talking about. As Tom mentioned at the end, at some point we need to sit in order before we make any kind of an intelligent decision. We need your input, and we also need what the design standards would be to see if it is if it's a type of development that would be attractive in these large acres. So with that said, I would be welcome to, oh, you jumped right up there, that's good. I would certainly line up in threes. I know it's a little bit of a problem here because people standing against the wall. And then we'll go as fast as we can. Remember what I said, it's important for us to know the reason that you're taking the position you're taking.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to ask questions. You want name and address? And
Yes,
Your name and
if you're in East Goshen.
and if you don't live in East Goshen, what township do you live in?
Uh, Got it. My name's Eric Tillis. I'm at 1398 Moorstein Road in East Goshen. I moved in the very first week in September, so this is all very new to me. I do not have a position that I'm going to be putting forth, but I do have a bunch of questions, so if that's okay. The first thing is, I really don't know about development, and a lot of the terminology is foreign to me. So you're talking about density and dwellings and things. My first question is, on a 20-acre plot, how many new deeds, how many new titles can exist under the proposal?
20 max.
20 max?
Yep. It is today, and it would be tomorrow, same number.
Okay, because when I read it, I could get up to almost 60. You know, okay, so, thank you. Second question, and this one is more directed to where I live. There's a good portion of that property, or those two properties, that are in the FEMA 100-year floodplain. There's also a number of creeks and things that run through. So the first question is, has EPA or PADEP done an evaluation of whether any of that land is wetland? And if they've done that, when was the last time they looked at it?
There's been wetlands, the Department of Environmental, I forget who it is down in Washington, they have done the wetland calculation. Now, sometimes it is accurate and sometimes it needs to be revised. The simple fact of the matter is that in this ocean, you cannot build in the floodplain. You're not allowed to do that. That is it. Now, we also, in the two properties that are in the northern part of the township, which are the ones you're talking about, there is not only floodplains and streams, there's a massive amount of trees, and in some cases, relatively steep slopes. Part of the reason that we asked this to be looked at was to make sure that while they're entitled to a certain number of dwellings, that they don't interfere with the wetlands, they don't interfere with the trees, they don't interfere with the deep slopes. Now, the fact that somebody can have, let's say, 30 units, based on the fact that it's 30 acres, doesn't mean that they can necessarily build 30 acres on that property. They may only be able to build 25 or 20. That's the way it goes. Now, if they were to put single-family homes or a boat tree type of development, which they could do today, because the open space one only works for single-family homes, they would more than likely, to get the kind of yield that they want, would have to disturb the trees, would probably have to, where appropriate, modify the steep slopes so they can build on it, and you would lose the natural resources that you have today, notwithstanding the fact that at least one of them, and maybe both of them up there, have historic houses on them, among other things. So part of the charge that the group had, even though there's only 4, is to make sure that whatever we do, not only we change or adding the 2 different types of the doubles and the triples that you can add, it's more about the protection of the natural resources and the historic resources that I think Tom mentioned. That's the critical part about this. Now, we have no official development plan in here to look at, so we're not looking at any particular plan. This is not a land development process. If one of those people want to come in with the plan, then it'll go to our planning commission, eventually work to us, and we'll determine what needs to be done. That process would be what they call a conditional use. A conditional use, for those that aren't familiar with our jargon, is nothing more than they have the right to do something, which they do today. However, based on testimony, we have the right to impose reasonable conditions to mitigate the impacts that development has on the neighborhood. So that's, if this were to go, and we don't know if it's going to go, but if it were to go to conclusion, that's what somebody would have to do before any development was approved at all. And that would be a long way off from now, because it takes a while for that process to, matter of fact, if this process was to go to move forward, it probably wouldn't be consummated because of the process that we have to go through into January or February. I mean, this is not a one-night exercise, but it is an exercise tonight, and to make sure we get from you folks what we need to get. And so we can take that into consideration in whatever we do. Now, for those that live near Thorncroft, I have to say this, and there's a conservation easement over the entire property that limits, so we believe, 2 to 3 houses, and there's one going to be under construction now for the person that takes care of the property. A conservation easement is very difficult to get removed, because that conservation easement means that the development rights to the property have been given up, and the property owner has been paid for that. It so happens it's a trust, land trust, that has done that. They are also the ones to see that it's done and it continue to be done in a manner in which the trust requires it to be done. So I have had, and I know others have had, some communication with people in here about the Thorncroft situation. I would say, for the purpose of tonight, those that live in Hunt Country, which is the closest development to Thorncroft, there is really nothing that's going to happen there that's associated with that over 40-acre property. That, in other words, the reality is we're now down to 3. The 2 up at the northern end of the county, and what they call the Price property, which is the property across the street from East High School, that hasn't been developed. It's the end closest to the end of the township, that direction. That's about 80-some acres. That's a big piece of property. They have, as far as we know, no plans whatsoever to develop the property. So the only ones in play at this stage in the game are the ones that require, and there's a lot of open space, by the way, down there, so it's entirely different than the northern part of the county where the 2 are. So we're trying to protect to the extent possible, but we're trying to do 2 things. Give more flexibility to the development that would look better than what we have today, but also for the protection of the natural resources. Having said that, I hope that answers some of the questions, but nonetheless, Eric, go ahead and continue.
Last question, and once again, on Morstein, and this might fall under your conditional use discussion. Is it possible that whoever develops it would put parking on Morstein?
We don't know, until we see a plan, we don't know where it would go or where we would even allow it to go. You have to see what a plan would be. The property on Morstein, as far as I know, has no plans to develop the property. The only one in question is the one on Richmond Road at the moment. They've only asked us to look into it, and that's what started this process. They have not submitted a plan to us, so we have no idea what they have in mind. As a matter of fact, they can't really do that, so they know whether we're gonna move forward with this particular situation or not. We don't even know that yet, because we haven't seen the standards that would go along with it. Hey, Tom, make sure you talk into that.
Sure. Do you mean, could they just put parking?
Well, if you go on Morstein towards Boot, so you're outside of the township, there's there are townhomes, and there's parking right on Morstein. So what I'm wondering is, under this proposal, could there be parallel parking right along Morstein, the way Morstein exists now?
Excuse me, I think he's talking about the villages of Shannon. That is a townhome.
West Goshen.
Number 1 is West Goshen. That's a townhome community, completely. I believe it's townhome. It could be it's not the same type of construction that we would be looking at.
No, but I could see a triplex on Morstein with parallel parking in front of it, almost the same way. And I'm just wondering, does this permit that, or is that something that is considered once a proposal is made?
So it's a great question for the following reason. Assuming that we would all agree that that's a horrible outcome, the design standards that have to be written would have to preclude that, because the worst outcome would be that even under the current ordinance, someone would do something, I forget the developer, Richard Mingy was the one in West Goshen like 35 years ago.
There were 3 of them in Shannon.
In Shannon. But it's a good point. So in addition, John, could you go to that comment 7.9 or whatever? Comment, yeah, 7.9.
Page 5.
So, yeah, on page 5. I think if I didn't put it in there, I did say setback buffer standards, but I think what we would have is parking location, so that you would put up some metric that no parking would be within X feet of blank, so that you wouldn't have that situation. So thank you.
One of the things that I really need to say so everybody understands is, We have done a lot of things, there's a lot of things going on with respect to the township in order to maintain the township's competitiveness with other communities, some of which are like us, some of which have vacant land of which they can develop without any encumbrances. We understand that our primary responsibility is to maintain or enhance the property values of all our residents. So everything that we do is with an eye towards maintaining our competitiveness and or increasing property values. If we decide that this is not going to work for us because it's going to diminish what can be done and be disadvantaged to the township opposed to be an advantage to the township, we are not going to consider approving this. The only way to get approved is if we see the whole thing laid out with the design standards and everything else that goes along with it, and take your input into consideration to see if at the end of the day, this is going to increase the opportunity for us to enhance our property values or at least maintain them, period. Because if it doesn't do that, it's no good use to us. So I want everybody to walk out of here tonight realizing whether you're with us or not with us, our job up here is to represent East Goshen and those that surround us in impacted areas. And we're not going to do anything that's going to East Goshen is thought of. For the way East Township not only is thought of, but the way it is. And have seen what we've done in the new park to do exactly what I just said. Please go down there and take a look at what's been done with removing what was the old equipment in the yard and the facility, the playground, and what the new playground looks like, including a zip line. I will tell you, you will be amazed at what we did. And it has become a draw to East Goshen Township from afar. And it's a marketing tool for us. And one thing we want to make sure is nothing that we do diminishes the state that East Goshen finds itself in as what we call a premier community and when it's most desirable. And one of the ways that we can tell that is looking at the property values and what houses sell for, and including some of them along our famous line, which really have maintained to a large extent their property values despite what's going on there. So we have ways of looking at what's going on. And I just want everybody to understand, all four of us here and Janet, we realize that our job is to protect your and our property values and to the extent possible, enhance them. That's enough of that.
Evening. My name's Jim Dorsey. I'm at 1020 Hershey Mill Road, so right down the street from the main property in question here. And like the last speaker, I have probably more questions than actual opinions at this point. The first one is to understand whether or not, as proposed or under consideration here, whether or not this change in the ordinance would potentially open up the opportunity for someone to combine multiple acreage and create new 20-plus acre spaces that could be used the same way. I'm assuming that once you open the door, that's the way it is until you change the rules.
Well, that's what happened now.
There, but right now, got a one acre per single unit dwelling.
I think it's possible in one circumstance up there, but it's not all the properties up there that are large could do that.
No, I'm talking anywhere in the town.
And some, well, there's none in other parts of the township that are like there, so you can't, and you only have four, and those other two, nobody can attach to Thornbrook because you can't develop it, and the price trap is what it sits by itself. So the only two that are surrounded, in fact, I think to the sheets that I talked about, you can see the map. Anybody else that wants to know that, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll put something on the website.
Okay, great. I've seen nothing in this ordinance that affects whether or not there are any historic resources on the property, and I just wondered if there is any special treatment being considered as
That's what Tom was talking about in terms of developing the design standards. design standards, because I tell you, on the one property, the Lewis property that we've been talking about, they have at least one, if not multiple, historic properties. You have to do certain things with respect to our ordinance on historic properties before you can develop, because you can't decide just to take them down, or you can't decide to do a lot of things to them without coming before the board, and the board may or may not approve what you're planning to do. So, if anything was to happen on that property, they have to come in with a land development plan, and they also have to tell us what they would like to do with respect to the historic features on that property. Otherwise, they can't go anywhere. So, there's about, I think, 100 properties or 100 historic houses or properties in East Goshen. Any one of them that wants to do something that changes the character, that has to come before the board, including this one up there. So nothing can happen unless, and by the way, anybody that's near one of these, if a land development were to come in here and it was going to be discussed, you would get another one of what we call 1,000-foot letters, just like you got this city. So you would know that something was going on. It's not something that can be snuffed by anybody.
Okay, and my last question or observation is harking back to the Hadley development. I know that part of the reason I'm living on Hershey Mill Road is because they were not permitted to improve the access onto Hershey Mill Road using the existing drive that was there to make it went too close to the wetlands and wasn't economically feasible to bridge over, etc. I know the Lewis property has the same issue. Is any part of this changing those kinds of rules? And you know, because they've got a single lane access into that property.
Well, they have to have, by our ordinance today, anybody over 25 units has to have 2 ingress and egresses. Now, usually they're not near each other. Now, it depends upon what happens if the Lewis property was to decide that they wanted to develop it as it exists today, or if this was approved down the line, if it were, they did that, they're going to have to show where those ingress and egresses are. And they can't be side by side because they're obviously set up in case one was shut down, that the emergency vehicles or whatever can get to the people need to be gotten to. So we are, I'll tell you how serious we are about that. Over behind the church on Fairway Pike and Boot Road, Fairway Pike and 352, there's been a development there that's been here for years, and it's got like 60-some houses on it without a second way out. We have put together a plan, which Hershey's Mill is looking at it, to actually put a exit into Hershey's Mill that will be locked unless there's a circumstance that it needs to be unlocked. In other words, you can't use it day to day, but it will provide a second exit or entrance to there if there was a problem. Because so what happened is a lot of those properties could make flag lots, and over time, a lot of the people that lived there, that was their retirement, and they became one became 2, or in some cases 3. So they're up to a lot of units, and we worked out this arrangement. We think it's going to go through. It's just a question of when it gets constructed. But this has been something we've been working on for years. So everybody has to have at least over 25 units. Has to have 2 ways in and out of the property, and it can be, it can be a deal breaker.
Yeah, and so I guess my question really was is that the rules haven't changed regarding wetlands
No.
and that improving those, et cetera.
No,
So they would have the same
if anything,
challenge on
more
that
stringent
property.
now than they would before.
Right, okay. All right. I can.
I just wanted to respond to 2 of Jim's points.
I think Jim made a good point on the combination of properties. Even though nothing's been written, something probably needs to be written to address your concern. At one of the early sort of brainstorming meetings, I brought up an idea that I had first suggested in 1994. 1994, the township had updated the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan was adopted about 3 years ago. The preceding plan was in 1994. And right after it was adopted, the township was considering ordinance changes, and I suggested that the price tract across from East High School might be a study area for kind of concepts that we're talking about today. So fast forward from 1994 to like 6 months ago, I said that among the criteria the township might consider to determine eligibility, 20 acres, one might be proximity to schools. And the reason I did that in 94 and the reason I did it 6 months ago is I thought it'd be great that people could walk to school. But I think your point's well taken. We would have to do quote unquote something to preclude the unintended consequence. Let's say 4 property owners decided to tear down their houses to create 20 acres. So we'd have to figure that out. Good point. The other one is, in the same way that I added parking location to design standards, I think there would have to be something addressed on historic resources. In the late 1980s for Concord Township, I wrote an ordinance amendment and came up with a sort of a care zone around historic resources that you couldn't put something too close to historic resources. So that's another good point I think you brought up. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Deborah Walker, and I live at 1336 Jackson Lane. And I back right up to the property that we're talking about on Hershey Mill Road. It's like right over my fence in my backyard.
In East Goshen?
Yes, East Goshen, yes. So I see a lot of my neighbors here. I have Sharon, I have Allison, Adam, Steve. Yes, Mike, yes. So a lot of
You know Mike?
yes, yes, it's right
Really?
down the street, yeah.
You poor woman.
Yeah. So we live on Jackson Lane. It's a beautiful cul-de-sac, and we love it. If you look at old plans for our neighborhood, there is, it's drawn as not as a cul-de-sac, as if there's a road going right through. We are very, very concerned that you guys would add a road in order to access this neighborhood, which in this case would be spitting, I mean, I'm sure I could stand in my house and spit onto whatever prospective road that would be at that point. And that would be a nightmare. I mean, for us, that's an absolute hard stop. That would be extremely unpleasant. So I just wanted to come here and raise that concern. Do
I
you
am
know?
sure that Mike has thought about that with respect to his neighbor, so I'll let him answer that.
I'm glad you brought that point up. I've had a number of neighbors approach me when I've been walking the beast or otherwise our yellow lab, who's a great dog. One of my educational forays, degrees, has been in city and regional planning as Tom, so I have a planning background. And good planning considers the circulation network within a broader geography than just a development, such that a circulation pattern with connecting roads from subdivision to subdivision makes a lot of sense in many places, in many cases, at the right time. We in this particular development in Goshen Downs, we are 40 years into the development. The hamlet has been established. The community has been established. And I've said to my fellow supervisors, as I have said to some of my neighbors, that the time has come and passed for a connection into an adjoining neighborhood at this point. If it had been 30 years ago when development was active, then it might have made sense, it might have been more compatible, we might have been overall more receptive to it. But the community is fully established. Number two, the fortunate aspect, I believe, would be a factor for any development that would occur there, and the developer looking for profit and to maximize their investment, is the relationship of the landscape there. As we know, it's a wooded area as it backs up to the Goshen Downs subdivision. It's steeply sloped, and the likelihood of taking a road, an access road, all the way through those steep slopes and through that woodland would probably be not a smart economical decision for the developer. That said, I think it would be a poor decision for a developer to propose that right off the bat. It might be a non-starter, certainly from my perspective. So I share your concern in that regard, and it's not because it's my backyard. It's the lay of the land, and it's the history of the community. It would be the equivalent, as I said to somebody today, to Will, of bringing in a limited access expressway through a borough at this point in time. It's been around for 100 years. It would be egregious. So
Yeah.
that's the way I feel
Thanks.
about it at this point in
I
time.
agree with the term egregious. I realize you're not making any promises here, but I think we do want to go on record that it would feel like a violation, and we don't want to chain ourselves to any trees, but like, you know, yeah, whatever you guys do. Just a couple more things for your notes. In the woods right next to the house, there are scarlet tanagers, which are just gorgeous. So for that reason, and many others, I'm actually not opposed to the duplexes and triplexes if it makes more intelligent use of the land and protects the environmental resources. I like what you said about setbacks. And in general, I'm not opposed to a landowner selling their land or developing their land responsibly. You know, you can't hold that against them, in my opinion. But I grew up here. I've been in Chester County my whole life except for a couple of years. And I moved back here because I love it. And part of it's how thoughtfully we use our land. It's beautiful here. So I just want to see us continue to do that. And as long as it doesn't increase density, I personally, and I'm not speaking for my neighbors here, but I don't have an issue with the duplexes or triplexes.
What did you say, scarlet?
Tanagers.
Beautiful.
They look like tropical birds. They're beautiful, they're rarely seen, but I don't think they're endangered or protected. Yeah, but they're special. Thank you.
Thank you. I must say that you did give us a challenge. I've been on the board for 33 years, which is a long time. I've never seen anybody chained to a tree yet. I'm pretty sure that I don't want to see anybody chained to a tree. So, yes, go ahead, please.
Hello, Christine Jampo, I'm at 1404 Westford Circle. My question is, I would make the assumption that these potential communities, as far as wastewater treatment, would be put on public sewer. And I live in a community of Charter Chase, and as you know, we're a 40-plus-year-old neighborhood, still on septic, and talk about, decreasing the value of your home, having that. I am a real estate agent as well. So my question to you is, if these are potentially developed, what does that mean for those communities who are not currently on public sewer? Does that decrease our potential of ever being on that because it's taking away potential capacity?
Marty, let me answer. Marty, let me answer that. Well, the simple answer is no. I can't look in 30 years in the future and predict property values, but the Lewis property is not connected to sewer, so that's another, talking about economic impact, economic hits to a developer, is that any developer would need to extend the sewer line from the manhole at the corner of Tanglewood Drive and Hershey Mill Road all the way up that property. The developer would also have to, a future developer would also have to pay for a larger Hershey Mill pump station. As far as, getting it, but we have the capacity to put in larger pumps in the Hershey Mill pump station. We have the capacity to put in new lines. The issue is, for a new development, we would require that they be on sanitary sewer, and that expense would be borne by the developer. The challenges with Charter Chase is it's an existing development, so where does that money come from? And that's, putting sewer in is extraordinarily expensive. So that's, again, another really major thing the developer's going to have to crunch the numbers on to say, hey, is this really cost efficient? As far as your broader point about, not having sewer in Charter Chase, obviously we're aware of that, and, that's an ongoing conversation, between municipal authority and the residents up there.
John, can I address just one thing?
Sure.
I'm the liaison for the municipal authority who handles all of our sewers. A survey to all of the residents of the areas that we don't have sewer, your development was one of them. Some years ago, where we sent a letter to all the residents, are you interested in looking at approximate costs? Yes, no. Back when that study was done, the exact figures, but Charter Chase was basically against the homeowners wanting to spend the money to put sewers in an existing neighborhood. That may change as new people move in and as the development flips to younger families and so forth. But we did take all of that into consideration with past surveys to see if the residents would be interested. So I just wanted to, I don't know if you were there when that was done.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was, and I think it was in, I can't remember the exact vote, but it was, it wasn't, 40-70 or 40-60, something like that. So what you're saying is that capacity will not be impacted by potentially putting these other communities on it. It would just.
We have the sufficient capacity at the Ridley Creek Sewer Treatment Plant to handle quite a bit more.
Right. And the other thing too is there any chance that you're going to refloat a survey out to those communities such as Charter Chase and I guess Ocean Downs about potential sewers?
I'll tell you what we can do. This is something municipal authority meets the second Monday of every month. This is something we can put on the agenda with the municipal authority and see if we want to resurrect that. It's not a big deal.
Good idea.
Sounds good.
I was gonna suggest that.
Okay.
Yeah, very good.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Kelly Richardson, 1025 Mill Stream Drive in East Goshen. I do have an opinion. We moved from East Whiteland 14 years ago to East Goshen, partially because East Whiteland just did not feel like a community. It's very heavily corporate driven with the corporate center there. Even though the population when we moved from there was only about 9,000 residents, you just didn't feel like you were part of something. East Goshen, as we all know, is incredibly beautiful. We've had people come to our home for the first time from other neighboring Chester County townships and remark about the hidden gem. It's a very common phrase that people use. We are very fortunate where we live. Some of my neighbors are here as well. Where we live in the township is definitely a hidden gem, I would have to say. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere without really being in the middle of nowhere. So to think about looking at suddenly cluster homes is what I'm calling them, the triplex, the duplex, and the townhomes, which make me cringe. It definitely does not, I agree with the gentleman here, does not fit in with what East Goshen is about. I do know that it has posed issues in the past as my children have grown. Unfortunately, families are falling apart with divorce. And I do know it has posed an issue for single parents to be able to stay in East Goshen because there isn't that kind of dwelling. But again, I don't feel it's the place. So I do have some questions with regards to the suggestions of the development. I'm looking at more at an economic factor. One thing that I've not heard talked about is what is the difference for tax structure on a cluster home development versus single home dwelling. My assumption would be our larger home on an acre of property is going to generate a larger tax structure than these cluster homes. So has that been considered, what the revenue would be generated for the township with the amount of taxes?
I can address that. In the frequently asked questions 3-pager that's out in the front, I hope there's still some copies. I think on like the last page, I listed all of the potential fees and ongoing tax revenue that would be generated from new development. So, I mean, I've given you examples there. It's impossible to answer your question specifically, Kelly. It's impossible to know without actually having any plans in front of us. It's impossible to gauge how expensive these homes would be, and that would obviously be a driver of the tax revenue, not just the tax revenue, but the permit revenue as well. In East Goshen, about half of all of our tax revenue comes from earned income tax as opposed to real estate tax on an ongoing basis. So, I mean, a lot of it is driven by the underlying income of the owners rather than the value of the property. But yeah, I mean, there's no question that probably on par a single-family detached house would generate more revenue than a townhome. But at the same time, you know, I don't want to speak for the board because I'm staff and I don't take any positions on policy. I will say this is driven by environmental concerns about preserving open space rather than about, you know, tax dollars. You know, East Goshen, we're very blessed financially. We're one of only 3 communities in the county that are rated AAA. So I don't know that we're looking at this as a township from a, you know, an economic value proposition. I think we're looking at it from, you know, diversity of housing stock and retain and protecting open space. I hope that answers your question, Kelly.
So I appreciate the environmental part because I do value where we live again and the open space and how much green is around us, and the 55 to 60% open space that we've maintained is a wonderful idea. However, you do have a responsibility to the township and the residents and our school system. I feel the need to point out that our superintendent of schools, Dr. Jim Scanlon, was not aware of this. I took it upon myself to send him an email and let him know about the rezoning. He had not been reported into it yet. Perhaps since then he had.
And Kelly, that's a good point. And just sort of background for people in the room. Once a year, the school district reaches out to all the municipalities in the Westchester area school district footprint and asks them about the permits that are being pulled, the number of permits that are being pulled. We will report, Mark Gordon, the zoning officer, will report that to the school district if there is a land development that's approved and permits are pulled. But changing a zoning ordinance isn't normally something that we would have communication with the school district about, because until there's actually permits pulled, there's nothing concrete for them to report to plan about. But suffice it to say, we do have a very good, you know, communication network with the school district, and certainly to the extent that this ever proceeds and then a developer comes, absolutely the school district would know about it pretty much right away.
So I know you live in the school district. You know that we just went through a redistricting, and I'm sure you're aware as well that we're going to be going through one again very soon after the 11th elementary school gets completed. So it is part of their planning, because the assumption would be, correct me if I'm wrong, cluster homes have the potential of generating more families versus a single dwelling is going to...
Again, there's a change being proposed.
Tom, there's one rule we have here. There's only one person that speaks at a time, and it's the person at the mic, because otherwise we're going to get into a shouting match, and we don't do that here. So keep going, Kelly.
So Applebrook, yes, you are correct. But that is a certain income level that's purchasing those homes, and it's a certain age that is purchasing those homes. Depending on the price point that a developer is willing to come in and build at and sell at, could most definitely generate families moving in with younger children that once again overtaxes our school system. So is that also part of what you're considering with this rezoning? Have you spoken to the experts? I know with the redistricting, there was forecasting out 10, 20 years for our school system of what they expected to have built. Craigbilly Farm was one of those in the Westchester School District. So, you know, are we taking this into consideration when you're talking about this potential rezoning of the amount of people that may be moving in and what those families and or households will look like?
Kelly, it's important to make sure that everybody uses the right phrase. We are not rezoning. The only thing we would be doing is modifying a particular ordinance that we have in place today to go from a single-family home to a duplex or a triplex. So Tom has been said this about 100 times, that more than likely it would be under one roof. Well, it would maybe 3, but it would be one roof. I will tell you that Todd Pollard built the carriage houses down in the Applebrook development. Pulte built the homes in the Pulte development. They're cluster homes. They're in the range, some of them over $1 million. Some of them, most of them are anywhere between 7 and about 1.4 million. There's, at last time we checked, there wasn't one child that went to the school. That's also true for the big McMansions that Pulte built, or Todd built up behind on the Applebrook golf course, the big ones, which are a couple $1 million.
So is that what you anticipate would go on these parcels of
We
land?
don't know, because until you see and we find out. Now, bear in mind what I said before. Every one of these properties has the right to development today. There's only certain ways they can develop the property. it's entirely possible to get the yield that they think they want to get within the confines of our ordinance, that you may find everything stripped there. Whereas what we're talking about is preserving everything that's there. So you wouldn't, it would blend in with what's going on as opposed to standing out like a sore thumb. So development can be good or bad depending upon how you manage it. Now, I would think that most people in this room that live in East Goshen, over time where we are today, given where we're located, would think that with the diversity of housing that we have all over the place, that we have managed to get this place in a pretty attractive position. We do not entertain the idea of changing that idea. If this is not going to work, it's not going to work. If this is a plus, then it's a plus. But we don't know that yet. But we are well aware of what you're saying about school children. We're well aware of what we're talking about property values. But all that depends upon if the property was to be developed, what they're going to do with it in the development stage. But we can't stop them from doing something that they're entitled to do. And today, I believe that if they were to do something on the Lewis property, it would be difficult for them not to disturb some of the natural features and perhaps historic features that they have on the property. And we, and I don't think you would want that to happen. So we're hoping that at the end of the day, if in fact Tom and our staff works on the design standards and we get an opportunity to see what they are in conjunction with how we modify the orders with respect to two things Tom was talking about, that's the only way that we're going to know whether this thing works or not. So I appreciate what you're saying, but we have direct knowledge that not all the time do you necessarily create school children, if you will. If depending upon your economic strategy, a lot of kids go to private schools as opposed to the public schools. So it depends. I'm not saying
That still taxes the public school system in many different ways.
I understand, but the simple fact of the matter is, we don't know what time of property owners would be up there at the end of the day. We would know what the marketing concept and the price of the house would be, the nature of the house would be, the nature of the plan would be, the entrance and exits would be, how they're gonna get the sewer up there, they're willing to pay for it, water, all the other things that go with it. There's a ton of things that are gonna go into a land development plan there. It is not an easy place to, any of those two up in the northern part of the county, is not, in the township, is not an easy place to develop. I will tell you that. I would dare say that no one's gonna walk out of here tonight, even if they think this is going to be approved, are gonna run up there to put a plan together to develop that property. It takes a lot of research to find out if there's an economical way of doing all the things that will be necessary. This is not like going out in the middle of the street and seeing the sewer there, or the water there, or anything else there. There's a lot of things that have to be done. And to Debbie's point, we don't know if it's possible, feasible, to have two entrances or exits. We don't know that. And if they can't have that, they can't develop the property. So this is a long way from anything happening, and the other property up there, we haven't heard anything about that.
So the Lewis property was up for sale, as you know, and it was pulled off. The Lewis property was up for sale, and it was pulled, at least the sign's gone.
Yeah.
So is it still an active phase? Is anything currently going on?
They went to, the Lewis people, the Lewis,
Grandchildren,
heirs,
yeah.
after the mother died, they attempted for a long time to sell the property. They wanted to sell the property to a single owner. There's about 34 acres up there. It's a fairly expensive property. As far as I know, they did not need takers. So they pulled it off and started thinking about what other opportunities there are. We told them what they were entitled to do with respect to our existing ordinance. And they played around with that to see, how they can make it work. there was some sketch plans made, there wasn't any kind of a land development thing, they just sketch plans. And that's all I've seen, that's what we've seen, I or anybody else has seen of that. I would assume that they still want to get rid of the property if they can, but the value of that property is going to be completely dependent upon what a developer can do there. Now, that is not our concern. We would like to work with them if we can and get the best thing we can do. However, if this doesn't work, not only for them but for anybody, then we're not going to approve it. If it does and they can make it work, that's great. But if it doesn't, well, unfortunately, we can't help that. And let's assume, I'm going to pick a number. Let's assume they can only get 20 houses based on what's up there today. Then that's what they have. That's what the property's worth. If in fact we pass, if we decide that this is a good deal for the township, not for them, for the township, and they can make use of that, and they can get closer to their 34, and it works, it's better for everybody. Because if you can get 34 and it be good, instead of 20, which isn't so good, you're ahead of the game. And going to your point, you're going to generate a lot more income from that. So it's not, we're not here to diminish what can happen there. We're here to enhance what can here within the, while at the same time we protect the environment and the natural and the historical facilities that they have up there. So we are in your court 100%. And Tom and the Planning Commission and those that have been working on this will know if in fact this is going to work. And you people certainly are going to be back probably with more than tonight to be talking about this, because the next step has to be somewhere to find out exactly what an ordinance would look like and what the design standards would be before we can even begin to think about what we're going to do. So I think it's great to have everybody here. I'm not so sure we'll probably get this many the next time, but we might get a full room. But the simple fact of the matter, you're going to get very used to seeing us before this is said and done.
Point also is that, Marty Roy, you said if this is a 34-acre property, and they can get 20 units, well, if this considered ordinance amendment were to be effected, allowing carriage homes, 2 or 3s, it's a net zero density change. So irrespective of whether it was single family detached or carriage homes, if you will, it will be 20 units with either housing type. Tom?
No, that's not true, Mike. No, that's not true. That's not true. If they were passed, you would assume that you're going to get closer to the 34 than if you build it under either one of the options today, because it would be much less than that. By the density of the property, they're still entitled to 34. The current zoning would only permit something less than 34, where they may get very close to 34 if in fact this were to pass as I understand it, short of knowing what the design standards are.
Well, I think, Mike, I think in order to figure out the yield, someone would have to do their homework and map the floodplain, the steep slope, the wetlands, etc., to determine Mother Nature before you could determine how many homes you could build. But what I wanted to do is go back to Kelly's point, and we'll check tomorrow. At the Chester County Planning Commission in Landscapes 2, and they're now going through the process on Landscapes 3, what they do is they look at the whole county and housing type and persons per household. And in Landscapes, townhomes or attached homes averaged in the county 2.2 persons per dwelling unit, and that was Landscapes 2. 10. For single-family detached homes, it was 3.1 years. They might have a different crystal ball, so we'll check on that for you for the next meeting. But as it was on the 2010 census, the actual attached home, according to their data, countywide, had fewer persons per household than the detached home. But we'll check the update. Yeah.
And my final comment is, I don't know if it's the law or why it's restricted to 1,000 feet for notification, but I think my neighbors would agree, I try to be pretty involved with our community and what's going on, and this was kind of brought to me on a sideways from a friend that lives on Moorstein. We have a neighbor sitting here that lives at the end of our street who received the letter, but because we live a couple houses further up, we didn't receive a letter. While my home might not actually look across from the Lewis property, I live right up the street. So,
You're in West Town, West Whiteland, right?
no, we're in East Goshen.
You should have done a letter.
We did not, and neither did our other neighbors. So we might be exceeding the 1,000 feet from that property, but it does impact people even if we're not physically looking at the property. So it would be very much appreciated if you don't want to spend the money on a letter, some other kind of notification. We have the phone call service that we pay for and our taxes, however you need to get it out there, but I guarantee you there's other residents that did not know about this going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, yeah, well, go ahead, Mike, you might as well do it. They like to hear you talk.
As far as notice and the like, I want to encourage everyone, and I think we have it on our agenda tonight, as we have on all our agendas, the ability to receive almost everything that is going on in East Goshen Township being pushed into your email through a sign-up, and you can do it through the website, of what's called Constant Contact. When you go onto these, click the link on the township website, and to go in there, you can select any number of areas of interest, whether it's land use and zoning, parks, activities, and we encourage you to do that because it's a way for you. Most of us have email. Does anybody not have email here? Just curious. Anybody off the grid, so to speak? So most everybody has email. It's a great way. We check our emails almost every day, and I know I see 6 or 7 emails from East Goshen pushed into my email every day. I wish I looked at them all. I don't look at them all, but I selected all the buttons. The Constant Contact, really, it's a great resource. So if you look at the agenda, have a copy of it, you'll see it in the bottom paragraph on the first page. I really encourage you to sign up because 1,000-foot notices or not with this particular type of a zoning amendment, everything else is available to you, and it'll be right at your front doorstep through your email. It's a real good service, and so we'd encourage you to do that.
Just without taking your time, just real fast, if you're interested in doing that, or get a copy of our agenda, you can get that. If you're on Constant Contact and you want the agendas, you can get them. At the bottom of each agenda, there's a way of doing Constant Contact, but also there's a way of doing what they call Ready Chesco. That's the county way of getting you information. So for those that want to know that, whether it's storms or whatever it is, emergencies, I would suggest that you do that. It's called Ready Chesco, or the bottom of our agenda shows you how to do that in order to get yourself involved. So I would do both. If you're not interested, if you're busy someday, just delete us, or just take what you absolutely and take a look at it and delete it or keep it, whatever you want to do. So,
but we
don't have many ways of communicating, and that's just one of them.
We have a captive audience tonight.
Yeah, we feel great.
And so in that regard, it's a good way to get this message out. It really is effective. And if we didn't really want to hear from you, we wouldn't tell you about Constant Contact. So take a look at it, see if it makes sense to you. I think it will.
Go ahead.
Barb Shea, S-H-E-A, 1785 Churchill Downs, and I'm in the development Hun Country. Glad to hear you're not going to do anything with that property, but I just have a comment from my perspective. We live in a house that's 3,500 square feet, and I can tell you I don't like townhouses at all. I do like the carriage houses. We're near Applebrook, and I think they look very pretty. The problem with Applebrook is when you're going to be entering Social Security age in 2 weeks, and you don't want steps, and you don't want another house that's 3,500 square feet, you do want a carriage home, but you want it around 2,000 square feet. And there's not a whole lot in East Goshen, and I don't want to leave East Goshen. So if, for example, the Price property becomes available and you want to put carriage houses there, that are not $1 million and 3,500 square feet, that are in the neighborhood of 2,000, one floor, you would sell out, because my friends and I, who are all the same age and a little bit older, that's what we're looking for, and we don't wanna leave East Goshen Township.
Let me tell you, Barb, I absolutely understand what you're saying, because I beat you there.
Yeah.
And I still do steps.
We don't wanna do steps.
And I consider it my way of keeping in some shape. Certainly round, but it's in some shape. So, be that it, I understand what you're saying. We do, in different places, in different ways, do have a significant diversity of housing. However, every place isn't for everyone.
Right.
And it is true, in our comprehensive plan that Tom mentioned, one of the goals in the comprehensive plan, which is a 10-year look at, is to increase the diversification of the housing stock in East Goshen. So, this is not the driver of what we're doing, but it's an outcome of what we're doing. So, we hope that it works, because it's just another tool in our basket of tools.
Yeah, we spend the winters now in Florida, and they have a lot of the condos, carriage houses, and I've lived there now 2 years, and I gotta tell you, it's the best living when you're older and you don't wanna do steps.
But it's not East Goshen.
It's not East Goshen, that's why I wanna hear.
But they have hurricanes and tornadoes and...
But you know, 8 months here, 4 months there, you gotta get me the right housing in East Goshen. You know?
We got the message.
Hershey's Mill's okay, but I'm not a golfer. Thanks.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Whatever it is. You and I know each other, yes. My name's Larry Weinberger. I live at 1414 Moorstein Road. We've lived there for about 33 years now. We came out here because of the character of the community. Principally the R2 zoning, 1 house per acre, nice open areas, all the wooded areas, the occasional stream that floods every so often. I don't want to see the character of this township change. And I truly believe that it's not for environmental reasons, and it's not for open land reasons. There's money behind this proposal. Some people want to sell their land for more money. Some developers will want to come in and make more money building houses. And I don't think the township should be in the, as you just said, we're not in the business of maximizing profit for other people. We have to keep a community that is nice to come home to. We all drive out. I have my office up in Exton, and I'm so happy to come home at night. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And yes, we know there's some open areas. We have the Schiffer farm right across from us, up around the corner. I have no expectation that someday that wouldn't be built upon in accordance with the R2 zoning criteria. That's one thing we looked at. Right after we got here, the Schiffers had a zoning ordinance because they were going to move the business into their barn. That's over the hill. But let's build single-family homes. If we have to make any change, it should be to preserve the spaces that we have, not to divide them up further with more houses. I know you might differ on a lot of things, probably not on this one.
No, it took an hour and 25 minutes before the first round of applause. That's amazing.
Marty, you were trying.
I was trying. All right, who's next?
I guess I'm next. I'm Sarah Warren, and I live at 1462 Blandford Lane. I live in the development, which is up at the top of the hill, and it's one that I guess some of the rules were changed for the development because usually you have 1 acre for 1 house, and I'm in the development that has 24 homes sitting on like 3/4 of an acre. And it's fine, it works well, but we also had to have a homeowners association. Outside of that, I like East Goshen Township. I'm very happy here. I think if you had some well-developed, nice carriage homes that were small or attractive and fit in with the character of the township, it would be wonderfully acceptable. The other thing that I always have concern about is traffic, road traffic. I think we all know that there's some places in Chester County right now where it's terrible to have to drive, particularly in the morning and in the evening when you're leaving work. And they have a bunch of homes now off of 30, and that's going to make that road even it's going to make it very difficult to drive. It's already slow now, but it's going to be worse once they get all filled up.
We are well aware of what you're talking about, and I can guarantee everybody in this room, whatever we do is not going to look like those units there at the bottom of the hill of 352 across the street from East 30. I think that's what you're talking about. They are the worst planned development I've ever seen in my entire life.
Right, that's the second time. Right.
Only took one more minute to get on that. No, I agree 100%. That is obvious. We have talked about that in this meeting. We are never, ever going to end up like that. I don't know how East Whiteland did that. I don't know the supervisor down there well enough to ask, but I gotta tell you, and furthermore, just as a matter of interest, they have one way in and out, and God forbid, ever accident on Route 30 at the bottom of that hill, because they're never gonna get out.
And if I'm not mistaken, that what you get for those units is at the price of $400,000 or more to start. So we do have some special spots here in East Goshen that are worth preserving, but it's not going to be like that. We were talking about that just before the meeting, and I said, I bet you somebody's going to reference those, and I said, that's not where we're going. Absolutely not. Not this board.
Okay, I'm almost finished, but the rest of the things I want to say has to do about roads. At least in our development, we have a very narrow road. I think the school bus can't even turn around there. And when when our neighbors entertain, everybody's got to park on one side of the street, and you can't park on two sides of the streets, because if you can, you block all your other neighbors in. So please pay attention to the roads, both the number of cars that are going to be on it. Hershey Mill is hold your breath and pray you don't get hit when you're trying to go across the road.
I appreciate that comment. I know, and from the number of emails that we've gotten in the township, and I've got personally, there's a lot of concern about any development that's on Hershey's Mill Road or Moorstein because of the additional traffic. We understand that. I can also tell you that if something was to be developed, the developer is obligated to do certain things adjacent to the property. You can't make them do the whole road. Now, the other thing too, and this is very unfortunate, because the state laws, not our laws, but the state laws are written such that you can't deny additional development because of the traffic. Because the state has decided that there's always a fix to the traffic. In other words, you can make the road bigger. Now, what you have there is a wonderful, both cases, but it may be difficult to drive. There are two country roads in a suburban environment. And we are well aware that any development there has to be reflective of what I just said. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but there's two things to take away. Traffic in itself can't prevent something from happening, but you can have the developer in property that's continuous to his do certain things, improvements. However, that's definitely not the whole road. So we know for sure, before anybody even told us, that the traffic on Hershey Mill Road and Moorstein Lane is a problem. So if there are people that want to tell us that, you can certainly tell us that, but we are well aware that that exists.
Well, I guess you could slow the traffic down to 25 miles per hour.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you would like to come over to Brookmont right now, we have the temporary speed humps in there because there's going to be work done on King Road. I will tell you, we can be more than happy to put speed humps over that road if we get the right number of people to say so. Because there's a process you have to use. I have to tell you, folks, why it works. Because the temporary ones, I'll tell you, are worse than the permanent ones. But I will guarantee that if you live there, you might want to think twice about having speed humps. Because God forbid that you ever forget that they're there, and the bottom of your car might be missing. So, there are ways of managing traffic. However, there's not too many ways of managing it on either Moorstein or Hershey Mill Road because of the narrowness of the road. You don't have a whole lot of options. But it is something to be considered for folks up there, but I caution you to be very careful. If we send out a survey and ask for who's interested and who's not, if we get 50% or more, then we'll move forward on that and get an engineering study. But I've got to tell you, there are some places that have had it that wish they didn't. And there's others that are very happy with the fact that they slowed down the traffic. So it's a possibility if you want to use it, but it has adverse consequences at the same time. But that's the only way I know of fixing that traffic, other than having the police stay up there from time to time.
I guess we could ask our local politicians to consider changing the laws in Harrisburg, because it seems to me that
Well,
with all the...
I want you to work on that because it might take about 100 years to have that happen. I can tell you from first-hand experience, every one of us up here have spent hours, days on this doggone pipeline that's running through the middle of the township to try to get changes in things that we know need to be changed. It's one thing to work with a PUC, they are somewhat receptive, but I gotta tell you, working with the legislators is a challenge, to say the least.
Well,
And I'm being very charitable.
I hate to say it, but you got a lot of voters in here, and if everybody picked up their phone tomorrow and left a message that you wanted some laws changed, maybe they would take a look at it.
Well, they might, but what it's very interesting to know, and maybe some of the folks know it here, as Marty refers to the Mariner 2 pipeline, which is our unwelcome visitor, which will go away, but that's another story. The political landscape in Pennsylvania is a very different one outside of Chester County. In a derogatory way, there's often referred to between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Has anybody heard that? Okay, so I don't have to say that. There's a different environment out there, and the constituents who have elected their representatives see us here in Chester County as very privileged, very affluent. Our commissioners tell us we're the most educated, we're the wealthiest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all good stuff. But when you go to Harrisburg and try and impart to them the issues that we have here, they say, it's time that we get a piece of the pie out here. You guys got it all. Pipe down. No pun intended. And Carolyn Comida is a good example of someone who is in Harrisburg doing her darndest to impart some of our values. I've wished her luck many times. I said, better to you than I don't have the character for it. And the same with our state senator, Mr. Killian. It is a very difficult landscape to try and create a consensus that would have some positive effects on some of the things that we hold near and dear to us. So it's a big challenge, as Marty said, but we would encourage any of you to speak with your state representatives with your issues and see if that creates some sort of a accord with them, that they can begin to work with some of their fellow representatives to create a bit of a caucus, if you will, to create legislation for whatever the issue may be. Well, as Marty says, with the pipeline, we have been working and working and working, and we've got some grassroots groups here with the East Goshen environmental safety advocates. We now have a pipeline committee, a task force looking into it. It's a tough landscape to deal with.
Yeah, well, Hershey Mill Road, and then I'll leave. Hershey Mill Road, I guess it could be an accident waiting to happen. Because I walk across the road occasionally to go to Hershey Estates, because that's a nice place to walk. And I run across there with my little 6-pound dog because I'm afraid somebody's going to be barreling down there at 45 miles an hour and I may get hit. And there's bikers that are on the road and all kinds of things. So, I mean, sometimes it takes a community to make things happen. And the more people that talk to their legislators, go in and visit them, or send them letters, or give them telephone calls, the more likely you are to get change. But I know how impossible it is. But nothing happens without work.
We'll keep trying.
Well, I guess it's all up to the rest of us here too.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, Marty. I'm Marie Caddy. It's 30 Meadow Drive.
What was the last name?
Caddy. Okay, actually. All right. I am really up here to try to get some clarifications on things that have been talked about and that are just a little puzzling to me. You keep talking about density. Are we talking building density or population density?
Building.
Building, okay. So number of units. But, so with that building then, it's obviously not population density because even one more house in the township increases population density. But well, you also keep talking about the number of deeds in these 20-acre lots. And this is another place I'm a little confused. And I understand we're not gonna play into here the number of parts it has to be kept under green space or it doesn't meet perk or any of those other parts. I'm just gonna say, we're gonna use a hypothetical. If we have an area that's 20 acres and we're keeping all lots at an acre per lot, that holds a potential, and you tell me that we're gonna keep what? 50% of it. We're just going to take an arbitrary number and say 50% of that right now will be held under our green space laws. So that leaves me with a potential of 10 acres. Someone else asked earlier how many deeds that could possibly mean. And your response was, in this particular, you said 20, but we're using this 10 acres that are developable. And so you would say 10 deeds, but...
No, it's 20.
Right, 20, and that's my point. So we have 20 acres, possibility of 20 deeds. But isn't that really more? Because if we put a carriage house on one of those properties, to me, that says that means there are 3 deeds or / titles, 3 separate homes on that property. So we're not really talking about 20 possible. We have the potential for many more than 20. Am I interpreting that right? Explain this to me. It's not making sense.
Tom, why don't you sit down? Your mic's on.
So, let's say there were 21 acres on this hypothetical, and you could put 21 homes on half of them. Then there would be about half-acre lots. If someone chose to put 3 under one roof, there would be 7 buildings. 7 times 3 is 21. So you could either put 21 single-family detached homes or 7 buildings where the roof would cover 3 units, but you could have no more than 21 of them at the end, either by themselves as single-family detached or 7 times 3.
That's the best explanation I've heard. So no matter what, if there's 20 acres, there can only be 20 homes.
Right.
There can only be 20 homes. Doesn't matter if, so if a builder comes in and decides that he's going to build carriage houses, he can't build 20 carriage houses to give us 60 people.
Right.
He can only build, okay, that is a big clarification. Thank you, I appreciate that. The other one had to do with another kind of a math thing here. If we're saying 2.2 in one of these smaller carriage houses, 2.2 people average per carriage house type thing, versus 3.2 in a single, if carriage house is 2 or 3 homes, then doesn't that still mean more people in a carriage house than in a, than a regular home?
There'd be 3 properties there, 3, it'd be 3, you gotta divide everything by 3.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. Are you telling me that each carriage house, like I'm seeing that you're saying by 3, that would be 6.6 per a roof? So again, I need a clarification on what does this really mean?
This is hypothetical.
I know, but it does help. Because you know what I'm saying.
Tom likes hypothetical.
Yeah, so if you had 20 conventional single-family detached homes, and there were 3 people in them, you would have 60 people. If you had 20 townhomes with 2.2 people, you would have like 41 or 42 people. But don't believe me, call 610-344-6285, which is the Chester County Planning Commission, and they'll tell you like 100 years of data. It's just ironic, we didn't even think about this. it's just ironic that it's possible that if someone did all carriage homes, there'd be fewer people than there would if it were conventional, if the county's data is correct. But I worked on a project in Gladwyck called Renfield for the former backup to Jim Gardner on Channel 6, Mark Howard. And at Renfield, they had a deed restriction that no more than 255 plus people could live in it. Well, a lot of people had their spouse pass and they remarried and they had children. So now Renfield has more than they ever had before because there's little kids in it. But, you know, from a county perspective, those numbers that the County Planning Commission uses might ironically create fewer people than a conventional home. But, you know, there's a lot of single-family head of household living in a single-family unit. There might be a couple from 2 marriages with 4 children. So the broad numbers that I mentioned could vary from any development, any house, any household. So, but I think it's possible, and I hadn't thought about it, that you could actually get fewer people if you did carriage homes than if you did conventional homes, possibly.
Well, no, these are all good. I'm just asking you for clarification because the things being talked about make it,
That's fine.
I've got to do that. And when it comes down to the final decision, is there going to be a vote or referendum put out to anyone in the township, or will this strictly be coming from the board?
Well, let me ask that. The state of Pennsylvania has very few things you can put on a referendum. Very few. That's by their design. We are elected to do your work for you. You are entrusting us to make the decisions that are best interest of East Goshen Township. We try to do that. Every decision we make is what we believe, each one of us individually, is what is best for East Goshen Township. If you do not like what we're doing, then when it comes time for us to be reelected and we run, you say, see it. That has not happened because most of the time, well, there's some exceptions, but most of the time because I have been around for a long time, I get a lot of feedback. I would say the vast majority of people that live in East Goshen are very happy with East Goshen in terms of many things. Not the least of which we've been very financially and fiscally responsible. We've accomplished a lot with what we have. We are very prudent. John does an excellent job managing our resources, financial resources, and it all goes together. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that we're the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it would be very clear to us if we had people coming in here night after night complaining about something. We just do not have that. Now, this is an exception because it's why it's not a big change. It's a change that's kind of misunderstood as to what's trying to happen. And the best thing that can happen tonight is the people to tell us what you've been telling us, and also for us to communicate. This isn't like a giant zoning change or something like that. This would go right in the existing zoning with the standards that they have yet to develop, and that would be the end of it. But in the end of the day, we may find out, we may discover that it's not for us. But we are the ones that will ultimately vote on this. And that is probably, by the time the process goes through itself, it's probably after the first of the year, because among other things, it's got to go back to the Planning Commission, it's got to go to the Chester County Planning Commission, they all have deadlines to meet, and we only meet we meet twice a month, although this time of year things get a little crowded because of the election and everything else. So, we are the ones that are responsible. At the end of the day, you will be holding us responsible for that decision, whether it's yes or no.
And the only other thing is, and you may not even be able to do this, but for all these people who do own all of these, the big parcels of land, has anyone approached them about any of the land grants that are out
Yes,
there? And
we've done that, yes.
Okay.
We have made them aware of the options that they have. We use one of the biggest land trusts to go visit so that the people had a chance to think about it. With one possible exception, any of these larger properties that you see, as far as I know, none of them are thinking about doing anything on their properties at this stage of the game. So, the exception being the one on Lime Road, or Hershey Mill Road.
And just one more clarification there, because I know along the, I know my directions, on the eastern side of the township, there are several parcels that are adjacent to each other that are smaller. And basically what I think I heard you saying was that in order for them to be combined into one large 20-acre lot, all three of those owners would then have to combine and sell out to each other.
So they'd have to form some kind of a way that you end up with one property or, yeah, I mean, that's the only way you can do that. That's, people have talked about that. That's almost impractical to do because people here, if you want to sell, you want to sell and get the best value. That may or may not be the best value. It depends upon what else is going on in that community or that area. It's very difficult to answer that question.
So, as a person who moved to East Goshen, specifically because of the open spaces that we have and all of the beautiful greenery and the wildlife and everything else that we have here, I mean, many of you don't know, I sat for 20 minutes last weekend and watched a bald eagle in my backyard. Where else can you go to have something like that? There's not many places. So, for me, as a homeowner here in East Goshen, whatever you decide, I would like to see land preserved. And the fact that you just told me that 21 acres means only this many people are allowed on it, not the 60 that I was horrified and worried about, definitely has put my mind at ease about this potential. But any change eventually means that if you change this for one property, then every one of these 20 parcels that we have has the potential down the road to change, and this is not just going to impact this one builder that's come to you. It has a long-range domino effect. So my whole heart is, I just want to see the land preserved here in East Goshen, as I know somebody else already said.
Look at this the other way. It took 20 more minutes to get that. Look at it the other way. What we're trying to do, for sure, there's going to be, if we approve this and someone went forward with it and it was acceptable to the township in terms of land development, you're going to get at least 55% open space. Now, if you take the Price Trafford, which is probably, everybody's aware of Price Trafford, but
I
it's
live right behind
wide
it,
open.
and that's where I see the eagles.
It's wide
That's
open
fine.
spaces. You compare cluster, the property design cluster, with 55% open space, as opposed to 25,000 per acre toll brother houses, one right after the other. Now, you tell me, which would you rather have? Would you rather have a cluster with 55 at least percent open space? Would you like to have houses in 25,000 square feet, and in there, because they have to have some open space too, but it's not near as 55. And you'd have one right after the other. And as a matter of fact, if it wasn't for the grace of God, we would have had exactly that on the Applebrook Golf Course of the whole open space thing over there. We came within a whisker of having 311 toll brothers houses, one right after the other. Now, if people in this room think that that's the best way that they would like to see East Goshen, please raise your hand, because I don't think anybody's going to raise their hand. So, this idea that we're doing is going to create more open space than any of the ways that a property owner in an R2 district could develop their property. This is a maximizing the amount of open space, not minimizing the amount of open space. And there's a big difference between the two. So I talk rather rapidly, and I talk, I don't know.
By the way, I want, and I think maybe a lot of you folks are aware already of the massive development that is now, after 15 or 20 years or more in the works, the Durakian property in West Goshen. Is everybody familiar with the Durakian property? The intersection, as if you're approaching Chester County Hospital, where you're on Phoenixville Pike and you cross where the Kraft bus, that's 550 acres. There's going to be about 598 units there. It is already under development. They've got access. It's full land development is underway. This is after many years. So if somebody, so we were talking about traffic impact, that's the potential for traffic impact. But as we talk about open space, more than half, Tom, you may know this, if it's 550, 560 acres, 300 plus acres are gonna be preserved, but they're still getting almost 600 units out of it. So you wanna talk about an impact, that over the next decade, you're gonna see some impact associated with that many trips per day generated. But that's gonna be a generational development, it's gonna take years. But you're gonna start to see that if you haven't yet, the clearing of the land. It's tough to see, but once again, it's folks that have acquired property over time, they have certain rights. I think West Goshen did the best it could to preserve open space, but at the end of the day, a lot of units, and you know, another way to look at it is there are a lot of American dreams that are gonna be in those homes. You know, we can't forget that. We just can't forget that. There's other people who wanna live the dream too. You get to a point, what is the tipping point? We're talking about tipping points on all sorts of important things these years. So, but keep an eye on that one, because that will impact us even though we're a few miles from it.
I'll tell you something interesting about that as long as you're here. The infrastructure, that is the roads and everything else that goes with it. It was determined by somebody that they didn't think the developer was going to be in a financial position to get a bond and do all that work. So they said, okay, and I forget what it's called, it's the only time in Pennsylvania it's ever been used. What they're doing is they're generating a bond that's going to be paid back over 30 years, and the responsibility for that bond is going to be the individual property owners that buy a house over there. This would be in addition to their mortgage. They have to actually pay for the infrastructure through mortgage payment that's going to be put in there for the developer, yet the developer will make whatever money they're going to make out of there. Okay? It's the most amazing thing I've ever heard of. However, that's the way it is over there. Now, I would hope, well, we won't ever come, we don't have a piece of property around us like anything like that. That's a ton of acreage. And they do have a lot of trees there. In fairness to them, they are going to have a lot of open space, but some of that open space is in property, is in wetlands and stuff like that. It really isn't usable open space. So it's good and bad. And that we're talking about, let's take the Lewis property. We're talking about the maximum of 34 units and could be less. They're talking about 600 units. You're talking about a major change. Now, I think there's some significant road improvements that are going to be made down there. But for those that go up to Green Hill trying to get on 202, it's bad enough now. Can you imagine any number of those people that would come up to try to go on the other side? It now backs up the airport road as it is. I can't imagine what it's going to look like after that property is developed. Now, we understand that, you know, they're entitled to sell their property, and West Goshen can do what West Goshen does. I mean, if they want to do it that way, that's fine. This here is nothing like that. So bear in mind that with the exception of the Price property, which is 80 acres, that's the biggest of the four. Thorncroft is 72, but it's got a conservation easement over it that's going to remain. Yes, is it possible? Yeah, maybe. But conservation easements are very, very difficult to remove, to the point where I believe that they can't be removed. And so consequently, Thorncroft people shouldn't worry about this at all if everybody else is worried about something. But I better go back over here.
No, that's, you clarified all my questions.
Oh, good.
You know, that was
The first time in my life I ever had anybody say that.
All right, as long as you're promising me that if there's only room for 20, if they build 3 carriage homes, that means there's only gonna be like 7 or 8 of them.
Can only
So-
get the same.
All right, that makes
Like
sense.
life.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Next.
I'll be quick. My name is Mike Mooney. I live at 1544 Tanglewood.
What did you say?
My name is Mike Mooney. I live at 1544 Tanglewood Drive.
Oh, you know John.
I do. Yeah. So, I guess a couple of my concerns are, one, this may be just setting a precedent. Like, when I think of East Goshen, I think of historical houses. That's why my family moved here. If we set a precedent for carriage houses, do we really see potentially that being 4 now neighborhoods of carriage houses, which I think would just take away from some of the nostalgia of East Goshen? And then I guess I'm also on the board of Hershey, of the neighborhood. I think my biggest concern was traffic coming into this, but from what I think I've gathered, I don't think traffic will really change whether it's single-family dwelling homes versus carriage homes. It's not like, I was coming in thinking there would be 3 times the number.
About a net zero.
Okay, yeah, because you all know that everyone's gonna cut through, I mean, everyone wants to say, I'm gonna go to the low weight, but they're gonna cut through Tanglewood to get from Hershey Mills to 352 in rush hour traffic. To
We don't do that now.
Yeah, so, but that was my biggest concern, so as long as that's the case, that's all. But I do want to appreciate the board. I know you guys aren't doing this for the money, so thank you very much. And I think we all can say Tom's definitely well respected in this field, so appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Very much, Mike. Next, how we doing?
My name is Ron McGill. I live in the original Hershey Mill farmhouse at 1050 Hershey Mill Road. So mine's the oldest property there. Good evening, gentlemen. I'm glad you haven't made your minds up yet.
Yeah, we need you really close.
I'm glad you haven't made your minds up yet about changing the zoning regulations that your predecessors designed to protect the long-term value and continuity of our township. By their design, we've preserved open space and historic atmosphere that drew all of us here. We have a good mix of high-density housing and commercial space along high-capacity roads and 1-acre zoning, full 1-acre zoning, by the way, with open space and great views along the smaller country roads laced with historic buildings and wildlife.
Sir, still can't hear you very
Oh,
well.
sorry.
You're gonna have to either slow down or louder because of
Okay.
the streaming.
All right, I'll slow down a little bit. In that development of property that your predecessors arranged, everything had a place. They would never have allowed a postage stamp of high-density housing to stand in the middle of R2 zoning. Those with influence did all of that work for us to enjoy and appreciate their legacy. John and Betty Lewis were those kinds of people. I don't know if the kids are here today. They were well-known philanthropists in the art world, and a Google search will turn up thousands of artworks they donated to museums that Mr. Lewis was involved with. He was an attorney who worked on a planning commission like you are today. When we my wife and I bought the original Hershey Mill house, Betty Lewis welcomed us to the neighborhood and urged us to renovate responsibly and preserve the historic atmosphere of the area. She spoke constantly about her desire to deed restrict all of the old properties, especially on Hershey Mill Road. And frankly, I thought she had done it. For 25 years, I've watched East Goshen and the surrounding area farms get developed, and I lamented the traffic increase that came with it. But I was comforted in knowing that that could never happen to the quiet country road that we call Hershey Mill. The R2 zoning has been in place since each of the current owners, the real owners who paid for the properties, that R2 zoning has been in place since any of them wrote a check for these properties. We all fully understand what that meant, and that subdivision potential was limited, and that it was 1-acre zoning after you took out the wetlands and the things that couldn't be built on. That was my understanding. I'm sorry for the kids that they can't get $3 million for this property. If they can only build 10 homes on it, it's worth what it's worth. And I think that Mrs. Lewis, and certainly the 2 Mr. Lewises before them, would want that land preserved to the best of their abilities. I would never restrict them from being able to subdivide, but I would urge you to stick by the rules that have been put in place to protect our township and help it become what it is today. There are only a few properties left to protect, and while I would never ask someone else to change the rules, I'm asking you to keep the continuity and the original plan that we all agreed to when we moved here. So that's my statement to you guys.
Keep in mind, I'm not here, I'm just here to share what I heard. Today, that cluster development, the open space cluster, single-family open space, is one house, not 2 or 3, under the same roof. Now, they could do that up there. and get whatever they get. It isn't a whole lot, fairly close to what they probably could get if we do the cluster. But with respect to taking up space, you're probably gonna have more open space with what Tom's recommending than you would if you went by the existing zoning. Bear in mind, as I said before, we are not changing the zoning. You're gonna have the single-family open space. The question is, at hand is, do you leave it at single-family, or do you add duplexes or triplexes? That's simple.
I understand.
No
what you're
more
saying.
than that. Now,
I mean, in my opinion, if you look at the map, that's all R2. You know, the
if you look at the map, almost the whole township is R2.
Right, so the responsible high-traffic zones could accommodate high traffic, right? Hershey Mill Road, we all agree can't accommodate any more traffic.
But wait a minute, Ron, I gotta go back. Everybody has to understand that they have a right to sell their property the way it's zoned today.
I agree,
And
but
they
I
can
don't
move
think
forward.
anybody would get
They can
approved
move
for more
forward.
than 8 or
Now,
10 lots up there.
I am suggesting that based on what I know, it's entirely possible that you're gonna have if you look at the Lewis property itself, and I'm well aware, I talked to the Lewises, I know what Mrs. Lewis wanted. I thought there was a conservation on it too, but there is not. It's a very expensive property to maintain. That's one of the reasons that.
I'm
I
painfully
understand
aware of what it
that
costs to
yeah, I know,
maintain
I'm
these
sure
old
you are.
places.
I'm sure you are. But the simple fact of the matter is, at least where we stand today, it appears to me that you're going to save everything that's up there that you see today, and you're going to, for the most part, have little visibility to what's going on up there with respect to development because of all the trees they have around.
And I agree with all that.
So-
But what my concern is purely traffic on Hershey Mill Road. I
Well-
think we could accommodate Mark subdividing his property
I
and
don't know
getting
what
15
I don't know
houses
what
up
they
there.
can build based on the ordinance today, but let's assume it's 2/3 of what they can get if they do the open space. You're only talking about 5 or 6 or 7 houses more.
And exactly how much more-
There may be no,
right.
I mean, who the heck knows what's gonna go in there? I mean, we're not talking about the Cherokee tract. We're talking about the difference between a minor number of automobiles and over what they could do today. But the trade-off is, you're gonna, well, at least based on what I'm hearing so far, barring something else changing, you're gonna get a better development out of it, which is what you really want to have happen. That's the goal.
Well, I'd rather
Because
see
you're
him
gonna
build
save all that open
$2
space.
million homes on 4-acre lots
Pardon me?
and sell 4 of them. I'd rather sell it.
Yeah, let Dave.
Well, I understand that,
Mark?
I understand that, but that's not what they're entitled to do.
I can provide a little information, mathematics on traffic. A single-family home, according to the National Transportation Safety Board, generates 4.06 trips per day. And that includes the homeowner leaving to go to work and coming home, that's 2 trips. That includes the mailman coming to deliver your mail, 1 trip. That includes UPS coming to your house and delivering packages. So there's 4.06 per dwelling, okay? If you put townhomes in, it actually goes down per dwelling because the mailman comes to a box and delivers, that's 1 trip. So the numbers actually go down with because they're only visit, like a triplex, they would visit 1 location and that counts as 1 trip. So,
But we already have a mailman that comes down the road.
yeah, I know, but what I'm telling you is just for your own edification, the math is 4.06 per dwelling, whether.
Well, here's my concern. I'm at the corner. I'm painfully aware of what over-improving a house in East Goshen will do, and I'm here for the rest of my life because I'm not gonna take what someone would pay me for the house that I've built over the last 25 years. That being said, if we develop these last few properties by today's standards, and I think the Lewis tract would only accommodate 8 or 10 homes, maybe, because there's some deed restriction regarding building within 300 feet of an historic structure. Mark Miller could probably get 12 homes on his place, and then there's the farmland that hopefully would never go that's owned by Villa Maria.
in that case, we're talking about 50, 60 cars, 240 more stops in front of my house. And here's the selfish part, I'll be totally up on it. If they put a light in front of my house, even a blinking one, that house will be unsaleable for any number. So that's the personal end for me. But the truth is, I want to preserve my country ride. You know, it's the best part of my day is coming down Hershey Mill Road from Immaculata on my way home from work with the driveways so far apart. And, you know, if I had $3 million, I'd write a check for the place.
I want you to sleep good tonight, so safe to tell you, we're not thinking about putting a traffic light. For those that need to know, you have to get warrants, certain number of warrants. And I would doubt very much that you're going to be able to get the warrants at that location that you're going to put a traffic light. But let me tell you what we think about traffic lights. We're not particularly really fond of them, but at Forest and 352, which I'm sure you're aware of, in the morning in particular, you're using Forest. You have a little bit of a problem some days of getting out. We did a study there to see if in fact that qualified for a light. Guess what? It did. But guess what? We decided that we weren't going to put it in there because the rest of the day, who the heck would want a light there?
Right.
And you can't get them to put the stuff in that always lets 352 go and only turns when you find somebody.
The
You
two
can't
new ones
find
on
that
King
stuff.
Street.
So
My
the simple
nemesis,
fact
I
of the
didn't
matter
know.
is, we are not big fans unless it's absolutely necessary of streetlights. And I will tell you, you are really safe where you are. And I know right where your house is. So I don't want you to lay awake tonight worrying about a streetlight or a flat.
Well, I've been awake for the last 3 nights with
Well,
the pumps
it's an
running
overpass.
next door to me.
Could be an
I have an idea for you though. If you converse with the Lewis children, maybe you could make a deal to buy that property.
I would be interested in talking to him. I actually reached out because I thought Chip was still in the area.
That's up to you.
He's in Oregon.
But anyhow, I don't know if they're here tonight or not, but it doesn't matter. The simple fact of the matter is, they're looking at their options, and that's what's going on. And we're looking at this option, whether it works or not remains to be seen.
Let's get him hooked up with Todd Pollock and do the $2 million homes and bring up the property value all up and down the street.
I will say one thing.
Our team for it, I'm sure.
I'm not a salesman for Todd Pollock, but Todd Pollock is a very good at.
He would
For
build
those
some
who
nice
want to
houses.
move and have somebody build a house for him, Todd Pollock, you can't go wrong.
Right.
But I'm not an advertisement.
Or we
for
could
Todd
make it
Pollock.
like our Drawson, 5-acre lots. You guys could take 15 acres for open space, take the tax write
No,
off.
we don't have that kind of money. Now, let me ask a question. This is somebody raised this question in an email to me. If we purchased the 4 properties to maintain them as the way they are today, I don't know what it would cost, but let's assume it's $20 million. Because it could be that much with the amount of acres we're talking about. Would you want us to spend $20 million to buy those 4 properties in total to remain them as they are today? And then we would have to turn around and make a specific tax that the township residents would have to pay for that $20 million borrowing. If it was 20, it might be more than that. But would you want us to do, would the people here want us to do that?
Wouldn't it be only great? Because one has to conserve.
So the simple fact of the matter is that we have
It's
thought.
always great when it's
we have
someone
thought
else's
about
money.
that. We have thought about that. Matter of fact, we actually thought about whether or not we could do that within the bounds of reason up at the Lewis property and perhaps make it into trails and so forth and so on. It doesn't work for us because it's way out of the way and
It's
so
not
forth and so
contiguous
on.
to the other things you have.
So, and I know a person that thought that he might want to put some kind of an educational institution in there. I know that guy too. As a matter of fact, he's sitting in this room.
Yeah, I went,
Up front.
just so you know, when I visited the property, I talked to the owners about creating an educational institution called
Campbell Sultane or
the
something
Town
like that.
Planning Institute, where you would have international students and students from the United States come to learn environmental planning, town planning, city planning. That barn is so beautiful. You know, you could have like a dormitory or fraternity style.
Maybe
but the
actual
cost to
outdoor
do it is extraordinary. But I thought, how sweet would it be to have some type of educational use? Yeah.
Okay, so I do have one question that's legitimate. Let's say it does go to a minor subdivision, and what could someone build there? What size lots would they need to have on-site septic?
It depends on which of the.
Provided they perked, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, which way they're gonna develop it, but at the end of the day, they can't max, I believe it's 34 acres, they can't have 30 more units.
I really think there's only 8 acres in the top that's buildable, personally, but.
I don't know, I mean,
Or unless
we would
you
have to
extend
see
the
a
cul-de-sac
plan.
from
I mean,
Hampshire
I would
down.
much prefer to answer it after seeing a plan, but if somebody came in here, they could, if they wanted to take the trouble, they could build 3 plans, because there's 3 different types of ordinances, and they could see which one would be beneficial to them, if this were.
Right.
if this
But
were
do we
approved.
have an ordinance, like if I split off an acre from my place, I'm on sewer now, but, you know, if I wanted to
Well,
put a septic up by
yeah,
my
you're
barn
gonna be
or
stuck with
something.
selling the whole acre and.
No, I'm never doing it.
Right, I realize that, but they're not gonna, I would say that it's beyond my comprehension that they would even consider putting a home on 1 acre lots. 'Cause
Well, let's
what
say there were
they-
4.
What they could do there
What
would
a
be
couple.
minimal. They could do, like, I'll call it like a boat tree type of a situation. It's possible, I don't know what the yield would be there, yield being how many houses they could, or properties they could build. And then, of course, what we're talking about. So, in the one case, they probably wouldn't even consider it. The second case, it's gonna yield something, but it may, I don't know what it's gonna be.
Right.
But we know that this one, I don't even know if this one goes all the way up to 34, if in fact we were to approve this. But it would certainly, in my opinion, it would be more than what the boat tree type would be. So, I don't know what they would do. That's up to them.
No, I was just
All
curious.
All I know is.
If I went to
that-
them tomorrow and said, look.
All I know is, I first met with them, they were hoping against hope to sell that property intact as Mrs. Lewis wanted. They were, as far as I know, they didn't get any success. That would be a very
I think the
expensive
listing price
property.
is a little high, but, yeah.
And it's also a very expensive property to maintain. The house is
Hey,
so-
I'd love to have a comp at 3 million on the street, you know?
I don't know what else you can do. I can't tell you anymore on it. You got anything else?
Anyway, thank you, I don't want to
You're
take
welcome.
any more.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks for the comment.
My name is Chris Rowe, and I am pleased to be here in East Goshen. I'm a resident of East White, and if I can proceed on the basis, my property, as well as other neighbors who are here, borders the Lewis tract. And this seems to be primarily about the Lewis tract, and that's what we're hearing about. That seems to be what this is about. Thank you, Tom. It's good to see you. But our concern is about the character of this. It is a wonderful place. I mean, if folks have been to, our property backs up directly to the property, the Lewis property. They actually have 2.5 acres, I think, in East Whiteman Township.
Oh, you're right.
One question I have is there any kind of interaction between the townships on this proposal?
We notify the other townships, and they in turn notify their residents. It's up to them to notify their residents. We don't notify the residents in East Whiteland, West Whiteland, or I guess, West Goshen, because all of them are affected. We would take into consideration the impacts on you folks, just like we would take into consideration the impacts on our folks. on that neck of the woods. And in the end of the day, if this was to go through and we chose to do that, and they put some plan in that would affect you, we would certainly work to mitigate the thing, just like we would here. We would treat you just the same as us. The only difference is that your supervisors have to react. They have to let you know. They may or may not want to come to our meetings. I don't know how they function down in East Whiteland, East Whiteland. But nonetheless, we are very transparent with our neighbors. In fact, we even notified Wellstown about the Thorngrove tract, even though this is not even a possibility there, at least at the current time. So,
So you notified East Whiteland supervisors about this?
We notified the township, not necessarily supervisor, they, like the manager, gets it, it's up to the manager to do whatever their process is down there. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, and I don't know that anybody got notice.
Well, the township did.
Well, the township did. I'm not arguing with that. That may, I mean, that may be
I
very
don't know
well.
any more than that.
So
By
we're,
the time
we're,
your township notifies your residents, we don't have any control over it.
I would suggest you tell the manager of East Whiteland that if in fact anything shows up about this particular track down the road, or when we're having meetings, they notify you folks.
okay. Let me ask you a question, and that's a great idea, and we will do that. I'll ask a question about that 2.5 acres or whatever it is that's in East Whiteland. That would be in addition to 34 acres. Is that acreage going to be considered in terms of the number of homes?
I think it's part of the 34 acres.
No, it's not.
It's not, well, then that would be added on, and they could use that, it's additive. The fact it's in another township doesn't matter.
I think, Chris.
No, that's not true, I take that back. That particular land has to abide by whatever the ordinances are in East Whiteland. It doesn't follow us.
Wouldn't affect their, township in which they're located.
Okay, so there wouldn't be an ability to put extra houses on in this circumstance?
Well, it
counting
depends
that.
upon what the zoning is over in East Whiteland.
Well, it's 1 acre, single-family home.
With no clustering?
I'm not aware
Well,
of
it has to be clustering, because they did that down on 30.
It has to have a cluster plan, because they just did
Well-
it down.
Down on 30 road, that's a cluster plan for sure.
Would
Well-
they have to work with East Whiteland?
I don't know what, you're saying that the zoning here at this boundary is the same as you're talking about down at the bottom of
I don't know what
352?
we don't know the zoning over in East
Yeah,
East
okay.
Whiteland. I'm just saying that they, at least in one spot that I'm aware of, which is at the bottom of the hill of 352, that is sure a cluster development.
Well, and that is a special case. As I recall, I was part of the comprehensive plan process, and there was an intent for special development at the bottom of 352.
Chris,
That originally was mixed use, and somehow got off that mark, but.
Chris, I think that, the property owner / applicant would also have to go to East Whiteland
Right.
if they were to, pursue a change on the housing type, because I believe that the zoning, when we were working on the comprehensive plan, we were looking at the zoning of all the surrounding municipalities, and we had to write a chapter on that. And so the current zoning in East Whiteland is for only single-family detached homes.
Right.
And I think you can cluster, but they do not yet have, nor does East Goshen, the ability to do other housing types beyond single-family detached.
I think there's another 1.5 acres or 4 acres that's right along Hershey Mill Road that also is not part of the 34 acres. That's owned by the Lewis family.
Okay.
And that probably is unbuildable, because as folks probably know, the stream comes through there and there's steep slopes.
Steep slopes and
Well,
wet.
it sounds like it's unbuildable.
So, but the point that I think Ron was making earlier is that if zoning stayed the same, how many 1 acre?
Assuming it's 34, including what you're talking about, they would be entitled to 34.
But they couldn't
We
build
work
it
on,
all.
we
No,
don't
they couldn't.
net, that we
No.
work on gross acreage. And if it's 34, it's 34, if it's 32, it's 32. I understand it's 34, I'm led to believe it's 34, but they would have to tell us what it is, and we can find it on a GIS.
Yeah, I think in East Goshen, I think it's more than 34, because owned by the Lewis on the adjoining properties. And then there's 2.5 acres or so that's in East
Well, if
Whiteland.
there's property
and the
that
adjoining
adjoins,
properties.
and it's in East Goshen, it's viewed as the same.
Right. Yeah, but I guess the point is this: how many houses would be built there if zoning didn't change?
Well, that's the $64,000.
Yeah, well, this is about that property. This whole proceeding seems to be primarily about that property. You don't, I think you mentioned sketch plans or something earlier, or, no?
Yeah, but they had some sketch plans, they weren't full plans, they were just an idea that it didn't even deal with roads and all the other stuff that they had to deal with.
And they didn't have a rendering of how many, what this would mean in
They
different
did, I don't remember,
number of parcels?
I don't remember what it was that they did.
Okay. Yes, 38 acres is the total acreage.
Included the total acreage.
Right, including, right, right. And it was on the market, went off the market. It looks like there's a developer who's, I don't know, I'm just making it up, that there's a developer probably who said, if we can get something changed here, then we may buy it or not. I'm just, again, I don't know the truth behind that. It's just as a neighbor wondering why it just went off the market and then hasn't been marketed again. But anyway, the idea being, there's probably a pretty good idea by somebody, some sophisticated person, about what their intent is, what could be developed if the zoning stayed the same, what could be developed if the township decides to change it. And I think that's worth knowing. It's worth the board considering if it hasn't, had that information already. Because
I can tell you this. They approached the township. I know the property didn't sell as a single entity. They approached the township maybe even as early as a couple of years ago. And said, what can we do so forth? It was they were just trying to figure out what to do. About a year or so ago, they said, what could possibly be done, which led into this planning exercise that we asked. They didn't say they were going to do anything. We said, okay, we'll look into see if there's anything that would be consistent with what we do in East Goshen and would be suitable for you. Now, we're at the point now, the board here saw this for the first time tonight as a collective body. There's work to be done on this before we could even think about making a decision as to whether we want to go forward or not. Because you have to see what the design standards are. We would probably, in the Lewis case, if they want to go forward, we're going to probably ask for at least the single-family open space and the other, I believe, is open space, the two of them, to see what they could do in each case.
Yeah, that would be great. I think that would be a good piece.
I mean, we owe that to ourselves as well as you folks, because why wouldn't we want to see that? I don't know what that is sitting here tonight.
Right.
But we haven't even gotten past this yet. This may not fly at the end of the day.
Right, and I understand, and I'm just saying, that's a beautiful property, and we've been fortunate to live next to it for the time we've lived next to it. I think all of the neighbors feel that way, and we hate to see, it's a beautiful home, it's, 12 bedroom, I think, home, 11,000 square feet home. There's another building on the parcel that's in East Whiteland. There's a building right behind our shed, which is the other home there. Beautiful barn, as somebody mentioned. It's a very unique property. If it can be developed in a way that is consistent with, protecting what's there, which is a valuable thing that's there, then I don't know how we can argue against the family being able to do something. It's just that if this law is being changed primarily for this property, then it needs to be figured out exactly what that means.
I want to dispel that. It is absolutely not. It's being looked at with respect, is this appropriate for all the four?
Right. Except that one of them is out of question, and the other two don't have any.
It stimulated the conversation.
I understand.
That's the best way
Okay.
to say it. By the
Okay.
way, your manager in East Whiteland, his name is John Nagel.
I know John.
And the assistant manager now is Steve Brown, so, they're two good,
Okay.
folks.
We'll talk to them.
The way they're communicating.
We don't know where the egress and egress will be. That is really going to be a challenging thing for that property.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if it's not going through the other neighbors' properties, I've had Betty Lewis, God bless her, drive through our property on a golf cart many times, but and that was fine. That's fine. And but our property would be the logical way out the other way, and I don't know that there's any plan, to go out the other way through East Whiteland. But I don't know. I mean, you basically have a single lane driveway crossing a stream.
Oh, yeah.
At this point.
I've been up there. I know exactly what there is.
So there's a historic resource, there's natural resources in a big way there, it's just a beautiful resource and property. So I guess our main thing, and I could be corrected by the neighbors, is that we would just want to see it being an open process. We appreciate the township allowing us to come in and talk as neighbors. We will try to be constructive neighbors and not simply adversarial in any sense, but we are concerned because we've had this beautiful resource right next door to us. I will say that I will be concerned every time I go from Hershey Mill Road onto Green Hill. That is not an easy turn. Because you can't see around the corner of that. Any additional traffic on Hershey Mill, that may not be the reason that a project could be, this change could be approved or disapproved, but I think that has to be a serious consideration.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's not a safe thing to go left, particularly, from Hershey Mill Road onto Green Hill. It's not. And is it a good?
I hold my breath every time I do it.
Right. So, and Morstein has its own issues, and it's a beautiful country road, two beautiful country roads that, the other parcel that's up there, again, that's bordering, I think it's East Whiteland. Is that what, it's bordering as well?
Yes, I believe it's East Whiteland.
That's West Whiteland.
Is it West?
So there should be, and I know this is a problem with Pennsylvania law and how things work, but coordination between the townships would be great, I guess, is the only.
Well, that's what
other
we
thing.
strive for. I'm not sure that
Yeah.
everybody does, but that's what we strive for. But I will tell you that when we look at this thing, because of the nature of the beast, given the fact that the price drop by the high school is wide open, what we want to do, what we are doing here is to see if what we generated, or what Tom generated with the planning commission, works to preserve the historic features and the natural features on both this property and the shore. Schiffer property?
Schiffer.
Because, someday they're gonna wanna sell that too, I'm sure. So the question's gonna become, does this do what we want it to do? It's not so much that we're doing it, it's the fact that there's a result in doing it. And the result is a ton of open space and hopefully the preservation of the natural resources and historic resources. Now, that's what we're shooting for. That's how we're gonna determine if this thing works at the end of the day.
Yeah, understood. And I would just say, it sounds hard to understand how it's not gonna end up, more units being able to be built on that property to do this change.
I wanna be crystal clear. It could end up as more units, but if you save what we want to save, we believe that's a reasonable trade-off. Because the additional number of units is not gonna be great enough to offset the value of the historic resource and the natural resources that are up there. Because if that property was wiped out with trees and so forth for development under the existing zoning, I have to tell you, you all would be in here yelling at us. So,
We wouldn't be yelling, but we would be concerned. The only thing is though, the traffic
how the hell can you
I
yell
mean,
and be concerned at the same time?
the traffic on Hershey Mill and Morstein they're just gonna increase, and
Of course.
those roads, so that's why the number of units is a significant factor.
I understand that.
And we will know that once we get to the point where we have some sort of an idea. This is all very beginning stage.
We're doing good.
It hadn't even begun.
Just so I know, are the four people standing there the last of the Mohicans? That are gonna make comments?
Yeah, and I'll give up I appreciate you listening to an East Whiteland neighbor, and.
I think you're wonderful gentlemen, but you did live in the wrong town. You do live in the wrong town.
But I'm close.
The market is good right now. Why don't you sell and move in these goods?
I hope I don't have to do that.
Good evening, I'm Joanne Weinberger. I live at 1414 Morstein. I'm not concerned particularly about the Lewis property, but living across from the Schiffer properties, there are two in this that I'm particularly concerned about. And beside the traffic issues and others that have been raised, I'd like to basically raise two other questions. One is, I understand that you're not going for a full zoning change, and you keep saying it's just a change. To me, it's a major change. And I understand you may not call it a zoning change because of terminology, but for many of us, it is just as important
It's
as
not a
a zoning change.
rezoning change, it's
Okay.
an amendment to the existing.
Okay, but that amendment is critical to us, okay? The difference in character between looking at cluster, even if it's surrounded by open space, versus 1 acre zoning is an important question. And I think to many of us, yes, 1 acre, although it may not have a confluence of open space around it, does provide for important open space between houses, between the people who live there. The second point would be that You've talked a lot about the 55% open space, and I understand that. But if the cluster is directly visible from the road and from the houses across from it, and the open space is behind it, which it could very well be, then that open space is not part of what becomes the character of the neighborhood. It may become the character of the people who live there, but not the character for the neighborhood as it is.
Understood. There's no doubt that the lay of the land will determine where the best open space is going to be, obviously attendant to the natural resources. So the view shed from the road, yes, it could be open, and you may be seeing the units, but it depends on which side of the street you're on, if you will. And that is again inherent in the lay of the land with if you will, design with nature type approaches to the development.
Joanne, I would say one thing, that from studies that we've seen, studies that Tom's seen, the possibility of that property putting houses on 1 acre lots is about slim and none, because they are not marketable commodities. The housing market today tends to want, if you're into the larger houses, wants larger houses on smaller lots. If you're looking at just the singles, that's the way it is. You don't see people rushing to buy 1 acre lots. Now, I'm not saying that people don't do it, but as a general practice, I don't know the last time that a 1 acre lot was developed in East Goshen Township. All through this development phase that we have, we're almost built out now, that I don't remember one being built with 1 acre lots. And most of them were built in the, like Bow Tree was, were in the 25,000 square feet thing. And I would question if the shippers up there would put 1 acre houses on 1 acre. I just don't. So you're really dealing with the two open space type ordinances, and like the other fellow just said, you would want to see what we use the word yield, what the number of houses would be on each way, because that's the only thing you're going to go on. Because if the property is such that you would see from the road, then you're going to see from the road, but you're going to see one type or the other type if they plan to develop. We can't stop them from developing because they have the right to do that. That's what everybody has to remember. This is not a question of saying you can't do that. They can do certain things. The question is, what we're proposing, is it something better? Well, we have to work that through.
Yeah,
Right, and I understand that, but if they developed it now, it would have to be a 1 acre plot.
No, you got a cluster, you got 25,000 square feet lots.
Wait a minute, it's zoned R2, East Goshen Township.
It has two ways of doing it right today.
Yes, so
They have
the
the
last.
They have the Bow Tree way and the way I live. I live in 1 acre lot, Bow Tree's 25,000.
Let Tom explain.
Sure. I want to first comment on what Joanne said and Mike said with design with nature. So allow me 10 seconds. So in 2019 will be the 50th anniversary of Ian McCart's Design with Nature.
I'll be down in Penn next month.
There you go. And so how sweet would it be that if this initiative proceeds, that whatever collective wisdom that we have to do a good job for this would result in protection of view shed from the road and all the other attributes we've talked about. So, perhaps if there were a goal, it would be to reach that end. To Joanne's point, about 25 years ago, maybe 30, the R2 district allowed two options to the strict 1 acre lot. One had 40% open space and the other one had 55%. And you could shrink the lot down to 25,000 square feet. So if you know Sorrel Hill, yeah, that is one of the neighborhoods that was built under an option that's been on the books for many years. And that's what the board was talking about. At the Lewis property, you could A, just have 1 acre lots, or B, you could have the same number of 1 acre lots on 25,000 square foot properties, or C, the same number of lots on, let me just look at my notes from the existing zoning. 20,000 square feet. So, right now, there's already 3 options, 1 acre, down to 25 or down to 20 with different amounts of open space, but they're all density neutral. It's all the same number of homes. And that's how Sorrel Hill was built. What this would do, if it ever happens, would be to create a 4th option. Same number of homes, different housing type.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying, because I had never heard of either the 25,000
Oh, yeah.
or the 20,000 option, and I'm not sure how many people in this room have.
Yeah, it's been there for, I think, 25-ish years.
Is that with septic systems on site?
Pardon me?
Is that with septic systems on site?
Tom, excuse me, I'm so sorry, but we can't do that without being at the microphone.
Hang up.
Okay, well, hold it, because I want to hear the answer to that too. Okay, well, thank you.
You're
Okay.
welcome. Thanks, Joy.
The answer, if you cluster, you have to have sewer.
You have to have sewer, okay.
Yeah.
So that
If you
brings the
use the
sewer.
cluster option,
Yeah.
you must have public sewer.
Okay.
If you have a traditional 1 acre, depending whether or not you park,
Right.
you can have one site.
Okay. What about?
First, tell us your name and
I'm sorry.
address.
My name is Rob Knight, 1013 Mill Street Drive. Question on the streams. Everybody's talking about traffic, but you see these little streams that are down there. If you start hardening the environment around there, I'm sure, do we do a study on the people downstream, on how that's going to affect them?
You mean with stormwater management?
Stormwater management, all that.
Tom can get into that, but we have very strict regulations that you cannot increase the amount of water coming off of that property with development. You must do something to handle it so that you have, if you have a gallon a minute that goes now, you need a gallon a minute that goes with development.
Okay, it's even worse than that. A couple of years ago, the state came through and generated basically an ordinance for everybody to sign on to. And every town, every community, 73 of them in Chester County signed on to it. You have to sign, every time there's a new property or people change anything, they have to sign a stormwater management agreement. And it's very specific in what you can and can't do. So in Pennsylvania, there may be a lot of faults with Pennsylvania, but one of them is trying to manage the stormwater management situation. And we abide by that without doubt. So if you were to build a new property, you would have to execute that agreement or you can't live there.
And they're on our agenda almost every month with approving those agreements.
For sure. And that's taken into consideration when you change the.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. It would be.
That doesn't change at all. That
No,
just stays
that
right.
goes with any development.
Thanks. Thanks, Robert.
That was too easy.
Didn't even get a clap out of
Let
it.
me hold you up for a second. We think we're gonna end this by 10. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, we are, because there's only, Tom, there's only 2 to go.
People there.
I will not speak that long.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're not gonna speak.
I'm not gonna talk that long.
Okay.
First of all, I wanna thank you guys.
Tell us your name and address.
I'm sorry, Cliff Craft, 1236 Highgate Road, Westchester. First of all, I wanna thank you guys for what you've done. We moved here in 1970, built a house. I worked with you on trying to get sewers into Charter Chase. The residents voted it down to their dismay. They paid, some of them drastically because of that. Worked with you on the Deer Committee. I'm amazed at how well you do that, having been in some other areas. But I gotta commend you on the job you do. My children and grandchildren have played on the swings and the trapeze and everything else over there. So, zip line, we've shot rockets up there. I don't think we're supposed to do that. We shot rockets over there.
Rockets and drones you can't do.
That was my grandson a number of years ago, and he's now studying engineering.
Is that police officer still out there?
Yeah, okay. Couple of questions. Live in Charter Chase, Allen Lane ends up into that property. Now, what property is that classified as? And where Allen Lane ends?
Zoning classification?
No.
No, the name of the property.
Isn't that part of Schiffer?
Is that part of Schiffer?
Yes.
It's the other side.
No, I don't think so, no.
It's at the end of Allen Lane.
I thought that was part of
Yeah, Allen Lane is the dead end.
It's a dead end.
The dead, you're talking about the property right on the other side?
Right on the other side of that.
If you
It's
could
the
bring that,
dark,
I know who that is.
it's the dark green property.
Yeah, we don't know the name of it, but, it's to the west of Lewis.
It's not Schiffer.
I don't think it's Schiffer, because Schiffer's across.
Right.
It's both sides.
No, the question was brought up earlier, and someone mentioned about, could the adjoining property cut into that cul-de-sac? About 6 or 8 years ago, we talked to someone, and they said, no, it wouldn't be done. Is that still true?
You mean as far as having a cut-through road?
A cut-through road, yes.
I don't believe, I'm not, we're making those decisions tonight, but I don't believe we're very interested in talking about cut-through roads.
Okay,
I know, I don't really like them, and I don't wanna talk for the board members, but they're not generally liked.
right, well, we definitely would
In
not
East
like
Goshen
it.
Township, they're not liked.
And he's, okay, good. So anyway, that was one of the concerns we had. Now, as far as building, as an example, if you take this 34 acre property and you say, well, you can put right now 1 house per acre, and you want to change it so that you can put clusters on there, and you want to preserve some of the property because of the views and so forth. Now, if we put clusters in there, can I, as a developer, take the front of that property, put clusters of 3 adjoining each other, 3, 3, 3, I've got, 34 acres, I've got 10 units I can put in there of 3, can I put 3, 6, 9, 12, and just line those up that way, adjacent to each other?
Oh, in a soldier
And I
row,
say,
type of a soldier row, no.
Well, it
Yeah.
depends, how they lay out, when, first of all, the planners are very creative, and they wanna create an environment. And they wanna create an environment that sells. So, assuming they could do what you said, if they wanted to, sure, they could do that. However, I think Tom would tell you that that is not the way a developer today is going to develop a piece of property, because it would be hard to market that.
well, the only thing I would disagree with you on, the planners are not interested in how it looks. The planners are
We
interested.
are, and the
You
planner-
are, absolutely.
But the planner, they have to
The
deal with
planner
us.
is not.
They have
The
to deal with us
planner-
sooner or later.
Okay, but the planner is interested in how many he can get in the smallest space of time for the least amount of money. That goes to the bottom line. They don't care too much about East Goshen Township.
Yes, they do.
I disagree with you on that heartily.
They know that East Goshen, by reputation, requires certain things.
Right,
And a planner will say, wait a minute, to the client, if you want to do that, the odds are pretty good that you're not going to get it passed at the planning commission, let alone the supervisors, depending upon what you're talking
Right.
about. So, the fact that you submit something doesn't mean we're going to agree to it.
Right.
We have the, particularly in a conditional use situation, we have the right, based on testimony,
right.
to put conditions on that are reasonable and sustainable in court. And so no one's gonna do something that they know we're not gonna approve, or we're gonna put a condition on it that's so onerous that it basically can't happen.
Yeah.
So I don't know about other townships, I know what we do. Our planning commission is very good, and I like to think that we're very good.
Yeah.
Now, whether that, I'm just telling you what
Right.
over a long time I've been here, I've never seen us not challenge what people are doing in a way that they've kind of modified it to get what they want, but what we want too. It's a partnership. And I think Tom would agree with that, because he's done a lot of work in different townships, and I have to tell you, different townships function differently and
Right.
require different things. And there's a reputation that goes around out there. And they're very conscious of that, because they don't want to waste the client's money on something that they know isn't going to work.
Yeah. As of today, I would probably agree with you. However, what's gonna happen in the future, that's what we have to look at, I
Well,
think.
Sure.
We would be looking at what we're thinking about doing with the eye on the present and the future. We're not gonna do something that that 2, 3, 4, 7 years is gonna make matters much worse.
Yeah.
We wanna make matters better.
Right.
So.
And you've
I
done
don't
that
think
so
you
far.
have to worry about us not thinking about
Yeah.
that.
Now, you've done an excellent job, because, and I assume you will, I know you'll continue on that way. When we moved here, it was one house, 1 acre lot.
Well, that's me
1
too.
acre, 1 house.
But you go back a long ways.
I go back to 1970. Okay, and we built, and a lot of the homes that have been built, and we look at those, and we see these single homes with people taking care of their property. Okay, now, you put 3 of those units together, who takes care of the property? Who knows who takes property? You've all of a sudden changed the whole landscape.
Well, not really.
It's a completely different aura in East Goshen.
Well, not necessarily, because you could have just the plot, and you could have all the open space, including what's on a particular set of 3. You could have all that land going into an HOA, homeowners association. It's not necessarily the 3 that are there in that little grouping.
Right.
It depends upon how they wanna set up the thing. It also depends upon how we would like them to set it, because our solicitor has to look at every one of these arrangements, because they all have HOAs.
So there's a lot of dependency, and as far as HOAs, it depends on how the HOA is run, who the people are running, and I've been involved in a number of those. Some of them are great, and some of them aren't worth too much,
That's true.
okay? So I think as far as saying that you can control how that unit will look, who will take care of it, how it will be taken care of, nobody knows. If there's a single owner, if a single owner had it, okay, the odds would be well taken care of, and keep up the looks of the neighborhood and of East Goshen Township.
Well, I'm gonna differ with you there. I'll take you over to some properties that are 1 acre that I don't think you would think are very well taken care of.
I'll agree with you there too.
Mr. Graham, I would say the same thing. There's a bell curve. In any subdivision, there's a bell curve.
Right.
Some are well-maintained.
Yeah.
Some are, for various reasons,
Yeah.
are in
Right.
somewhat distress and not the way we might maintain them, but there could be.
There's a bell-shaped curve and everything.
You got that right.
I gotta tell you what, most of these places today get somebody to perform the services like lawn mowing, snow plowing.
Right. Yeah.
We do the trash, but it's not left, generally speaking, to the homeowner. And I have to tell you, if you had a unit of 3, and there was one that wasn't pulling their weight, I think the other 2 would sit them down and say, wait a minute, you're affecting us as well as yourself, and that's not gonna work.
Well, that similarly has happened with single homes too.
No, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, we talk to the neighbors and say, I think the grass needs cutting, or I think we ought to clean those shrubs up a little bit.
I like it better when you were saying really nice things, though.
Well, I'm not saying anything negative about you, but my opinion is for one house on 1 acre and forget the clusters. I think that ruins the whole thing.
That ain't gonna happen.
If somebody has bought 20 acres of land with the idea of putting 20 homes on it, and they know that there is certain streams going through it, or historic things, they did that when they bought it, I mean, that's their problem, okay?
Well,
So
that
you
is-
can't build on those, you
that
got
is
your
correct.
20 acres,
That's right.
your 20 acres, build on the 6 acres, and take your losses,
But
but
if we can preserve what's there, we would like to do that.
Yeah.
One more, we got one more, we're almost at the 10 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Joanne Tillis, and I recently moved here. I've been here a month. And
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I live on Morstein Road. And when we were looking at houses, the bridge was out on Morstein. So we did not know that development was there at first. You couldn't get there. We're just past it. So we drove down King, made a right down Morstein. This is beautiful. This is so bucolic. We bought our house. We're thrilled to call it home. I would rather, and I'm deferring to my neighbors who I've heard speak, I would rather go with the devil we know than the devil we don't, in the sense that we've heard, and the Lewis property, the gentleman that was saying you could maybe put 8 houses there. The one across the street, down the road from me, you could, I don't know how many, but it's very steep, it's not, there's the floodplains, there's wetlands. I would rather take my chances on what a builder could put in within the constraints of the topography than go on a sure bet of townhouses and triplexes and things like that. The other thing, when you talk about homes that, you know, the R2, the interpretation of the R2, where you can say, okay, instead of doing 1 acre, we're gonna do it a half acre, because I've lived in HOAs, your half acre that got parceled out now become, you all own the common space together. So your half acre, you don't have 1 half acre, you still own your acre is completed. The other part of that jigsaw is the common space.
Open space.
Right. And having lived in places like this, guess where they don't put common open space? They don't put it as big buffers around the property. They put it as playgrounds, as ponds. They put it in areas where the residents will enjoy and benefit from it, not the neighbors. That's, I mean, if you're selling to families with children, a playground in the middle is a huge draw, rather than taking that half acre or so and giving another buffer to those who live alongside. I think the site views are going to be terrible. It's up on a hill. I think that's all we would see. And I would just remind you, as sitting back here, having the benefit of facing forward, I would remind you to look above your shoulders. Preserve the past, serve the present, protecting the future. I think when you talked about one of the things you're looking out for is property values and maintaining them in our township. I think the people that will benefit from those are the people that buy these townships and are surrounded by beautiful beautiful homes on 1 acre. I don't think it goes both ways.
Well, remember now that they can build, right now, they can build on 25,000 square foot, or 20,000 square foot. So the 1 acre that you're talking about, I don't disagree with you. There already are options.
Right, but that becomes an HOA, correct? Because it's common space.
Most likely,
It has
Well,
to,
most
if you're
likely
gonna
it'd be
have
an HOA.
joint ownership and everything, or space, if you own part of a common property, it's going to be an HOA. And I love the idea of open space, but I know how HOAs work. They're not looking out for the neighbors, they're looking out to that. So that's what they would have to do. I would take my chance on someone buying the 20-acre parcel and putting in 6 homes on 1 acre each.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Probably no one will disagree with you, except in today's environment, nobody would do that.
Do what?
You use 1 acre lots. They just wouldn't do it, because they can't sell.
I just bought a 1 acre lot. I mean, I bought a house on an acre.
Yeah, but yours was there. I'm talking about
Right.
new development. It's almost, because if in fact that was marketable or saleable, you would see that. You don't see that at all.
Good night, folks. Thank you.
Thank you. You don't see it at all. So we have to be prepared for what we get feedback on as to what the market requires, or market wants, because there's no sense doing something that's a wish. It's not gonna happen. And I don't disagree, because I live on a 1 acre lot. And, you get a lot of privacy out of it, I'm responsible for the property and so forth and so on. However, that just isn't the way things are done today. And people today, particularly millennials in particular, who are a big part of the market. In fact, there's usually 2 ends. You got the millennials and you got the older folks. And we got both in East Goshen. So you gotta kind of cater to both. I don't know what happens in the middle. I don't know where the middle people all went, but the millennials want certain things. And they do not want a lot of property to take care of. They don't mind a bigger house, but they want it smaller. And we have a couple ways of doing that now. This isn't too far away from that. This is giving the developer the opportunity to be more flexible in what they do and hopefully come up with a better environment. That's
But
literally what
it will change the integrity of the neighborhood, and for many of us, the draw was, for me, a horse farm, which I know won't be there forever, but.
Either you gotta get your friends to buy the property, or you, because I don't know what you do, if they wanna develop their property, I think you have to, we're talking shipper property, right?
Yes.
That, we've never heard anything about them wanting to sell it, something in the near future. I am sure that someday, kids don't seem to wanna keep large acreage, because they have to maintain it. and that costs money. I mean, that's what's going on, and as a consequence of that, more than likely, at some point, it will go up for
Okay,
sale.
so my bottom line is, it's not your responsibility to create a profit for anyone selling property. That's right, that's real estate.
And we're not
right.
trying to do that.
So why, these people have this property, they know the zoning laws, why not let them just roll the dice and see what happens on their own? If they can't sell, if they can't put up 20 houses, they can't put up 20
Oh, yeah.
houses. So
They-
why change it?
We can, but in doing so, they may destroy a lot of the natural resources, and depending on what they do with historical resource, it may do away with that. What we're trying to do is to do something that maintains that.
And I understand that, and I respect that, but I also think that there are natural boundaries that they will not be able to touch. There will be things that will be natural, open space. Like you talk about that place in Westchester with the 500 acres and 350 are open space, and you said, but a lot of those are wetlands and swamp. That's my point. You have natural open space that would not be able to be developed
You were
regardless.
correct. The property, the Lewis property has floodplain on it that you can't put in. However, where a lot of the trees are, that they can be taken down and houses built there because they're not in the floodplain or under steep slopes. Because some slopes can be modified to accept a development, a house. Not all, because some of them are too steep. But I'm not gonna argue what the developer should do or not. All we're doing is providing, well, we're not providing anything, because we don't know if we're gonna do it. But if it turns out that we should, our decision would be, it's reasonable to do, and it's in the best interest of the township in our minds. If we don't, that's the only reason we would do that. If we think it's in the best interest of East Goshen residents, then that's what we'll do. If we don't, we won't.
Thank you very much, and
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. We welcome you to come down, every first Tuesday and the third Tuesday. It might come a lot of comfort. Are we gonna do it, or?
Wait, before people go.
Oh, yeah. We gotta make a motion.
Yeah, hang on.
Don't, guys, don't go yet, don't leave yet, don't leave yet. Guys, this is the important part, guys, don't, this is.
Wait a minute. Hey, guys, hey, folks, if you can slow down for just a second, we have to make a motion to take.
What our next step is.
The next step, we're not talking about approval or not approval, we gotta do something here to get this thing moving.
Authorize staff to look further into it.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody. I thought we had some great input tonight. Tom took copious notes.
I have 18 pages.
18 pages of notes, and the input was really valuable. And I actually heard some things tonight that we're going to have to incorporate in our design standards and so on. So I think the input was really spectacular. So I'm going to make a motion that the board directs staff to draft ordinance amendments that reflect the input from the public, the planning consultant, the planning commission, and the township solicitor for us to consider.
In a draft form.
In a draft.
I will second that, but I just need to clarify. Mike, unless you wanted the second? I will second it, but I'm clarifying to those that are still here. We are not pulling the trigger on everything. This is not a backroom deal. We are simply asking staff to start putting some of the information together to look at. There's much more public input, planning commission. I just need to verify that's what we're voting on. We are not voting to do anything more than gather more information and put it in an organized form.
Structure. That's all we're doing is a draft, so we can see what it looks like, particularly with the important element, as Chair Marty Shane said early on, these design elements are going to be critical. So that's what we're giving want the staff authorized with our consultant, TCA Tom Committa, to be able to do
that. Would include design standards.
Yes, that's a very important
We'd like to know what that looks like.
Based on that, I will second it.
Comments from the board? Anybody out there want to make any comments? Yeah. We get copies of that? Oh, you gotta stand up there.
Barbara
It's
Stevens.
a representative democracy. You voted for us to be here, and that's why we explained that earlier.
We can check and see what people want. 1560 Melrose Lane. I just wanted to say, it seemed like you had a lot of people here tonight that were against all of this, and yet you guys are ready to move forward. And I know you're not making any specific plan yet, you're not voting to make this change, but I didn't hear like maybe 2 people stand up to say, this is a great idea, guys.
We understand that.
Okay.
We need to see the design standards and everything that goes with this to make any kind of a reasonable decision about whether this is good or bad. We have no idea what's in the design standards. That wasn't the purpose of this meeting. This meeting was only to talk about modifying the ordinance to allow the thing. I understand we know very clear what people said.
So it doesn't really matter what we say.
It does. I don't say it that way. We need to advance the project. This is another step that we
He's
want to
got
take
18
to refine it, and you'll have a chance to look at that and provide
He's
it.
got 18
We haven't made a
pages
decision,
of
but we
things
want to see a
listed.
structured form.
John, how many pages you got there? About 27.
I got a lot.
John has 27 and 18. We are certainly listening to the residents, for goodness sakes.
Marty, I don't know how you say that.
We just said it, and we meant it.
If the consensus, if you had a consensus now not to move forward, would you still ask for an amendment? Or something to be drafted?
No, if we want to move forward or not move forward until we find out all the information. We would be doing a complete disservice to this township if we didn't get all the facts before we made a decision. You may not agree with it, but that's the way we work. We work predicated on all the information. If we don't have all the information, we can't make a decision. It's that simple. You may not agree with that, but that's the way it goes. I mean, I can't imagine that anybody would want to sit, I mean, maybe some people out there would like us to say, we're not moving it 1 inch further than we are already. Okay, well, that's fine. But this board works on the complete picture before we pull the trigger one way or the other. So I would think that you would commend us for doing that because it's a lot of work to do that. And it's one of the reasons the township is in the position it's in. It's why you like the township and everybody else likes the township, because we take the time to think this through.
Just explain to me one thing, how would a design standard enter into your final analysis?
Because we don't know what's gonna be required of whoever would use this if it went into place. We have no idea.
Once we have a design standard in place, through a draft and some more structure, we may be able to ask Mr. Comita and his consulting firm to give us some illustrations of what the property might look like under those design standards with a couple of the options. It will provide us an opportunity to examine it in a real scenario of a concept plan. And Tom, we would probably ask you to do that. Once we see the ordinance, we will say, take a look at 1 or 2 of these properties and put several of the existing ordinance provisions into a sketch plan and give us one with the new design provisions and see what it looks like. And and if we do that, we will put that on the website. We'll probably have some more dialogue. That's a continuation of the process and vetting this effectively. It's that simple.
Mike, one of the options, John, you can't access Google Earth right now, can you?
Yeah.
You can. Could you Google Glen Middle School faculty housing at Spring Lawn Road and Cheney Road?
Oh, I know that, yeah.
Okay, I just want to go there because it's all single-family detached homes, all. And when I did the plan for it in 1999, and I wrote the design standards, there were 3 cluster plans that were prepared by civil engineering firms, and the school rejected them, and they came to me in 1999 and said, Tom, you could do a better job. So I'd like to show you a neighborhood that I designed of all single-family homes, no duplex, no triplex, and how we crafted them, which would almost be the same as the design standards that East Goshen has now for 20,000 square foot lots and 50% open space. The only difference is that I promulgated the usable open space. Actually, I have 70% open space.
What was it?
So it's at Spring Lawn Road and Cheney Road in Faubourg Township, Delaware County. If you zoom in, you're almost there in the middle. Just zoom in. I can see it right in the center.
You can see it.
Somebody help me here.
How about if you just Google Glen Mills School and drag the cursor up? Glen Mills School. Okay, now drag the image up, move up, and the other way, other way, up, up.
You told me before.
Now move, keep going, you're almost there. Okay, now move it over, right there, boom. Now just zoom in for a minute. Okay, all of those homes, so 70% open space, it's agricultural land around, they still farm it. All those homes are single family detached, they have a little green around them. This is a technique, John, move it over to the, you can see the neighbors, they're all single family. They all have detached garages. If you move it over, boom, a little more, okay, there it goes, this little civic greens. It's the same density that the Thornbury, Delaware County ordinance allowed that we have in East Goshen, except I put them so that each neighborhood would have a sub-neighborhood green, 70% open space, and it's not duplex and triplex. I've designed about 10 of these in the Mid-Atlantic states. The only reason I'm talking about it is what I heard the neighbors say is they're worried about the housing type. There are alternative design standards to the layout of neighborhoods that are density neutral and not a different housing type. And I'm not a real estate expert, so somebody could say what the house costs, but it's the same number of units and equal or more open space. The only reason I'm bringing this to our attention is I think in fairness to the board and to the community, and going in the next step, we can also look at options that are creative, that are different, and that are better design outcomes than the standards that were written 30 years ago. That's all I wanted to bring to our attention by looking at this neighborhood. And that's it. So I just wanted to say that because if the volatile issue here is the housing type, there are sweet ways to design neighborhoods with single family detached, which is what I also did in Schuylkill for the Reeves tract that Todd Poley built. And so in fairness to the board, there are some other options and ideas that we can discuss further. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, they say they save the best for last, so you can sit down. Anyway, my name is Jeff Ball. I live at 1237 Highgate Road, Charter Chase. And for non-disclosure agreement, you're looking at the guy who kissed your wife when she became mayor. I was the first guy that kissed her. And it was on Walnut Street. She wasn't even in office yet. And I said, let me give you the future mayor a kiss. And she said, okay. It was on the cheek. All right?
Was he the guy we called the police on after?
I've been there too.
Now I have 19 pages of notes.
I'm not the brightest star in the universe. I'm really not. I didn't understand half, 75% of the crap you guys were talking about. And it's not crap, it's important. You know, zoning this and zoning that and cluster this and cluster that. All I can tell you is the ride from Boot Road down Moorstein with Schiffer's Farm and the place on the left is like a little bit of paradise when you come out of the zoo of 202. And the horses out there, it's just absolutely aesthetically beautiful.
Yep.
Now, you guys got a tough job. And you got to do all these numbers and all this crap and, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And you're going to do it, fine. But let me tell you, if, you know, money talks and BS walks, and if the big money boys get involved in this and they start making plans to upset Schiffer's Farm, and I understand Schiffer has a a right to sell their property, okay? But when it comes right down to the, the rubber meets the road, this crowd in here is nothing. And the next crowd, if it gets to that point, and I hope it doesn't, we're gonna have lawyers. We're gonna have all the red tape in the world. I'm hoping that you guys fulfill, you know what I'm talking about. I don't have to get into details. You know what a beautiful road that is, and the little bridge and the creeks. Can you see all those houses and people coming, trying to get across that bridge? So that's, I told you the best for last, so that's it. And your wife is just a wonderful lady.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Again, thank you. Again, with what is in place with our ordinance, the shippers could do that, pretty much of that tomorrow, if they wanted to, and the same with the Lewises. All we looked at tonight, all we discussed was one other housing type which has had a popularity of value added in certain areas. We've seen them in Applebrook. All we're talking about is one additional housing type that we're not sure we're gonna do, and what you just portended potentially with the shippers could happen tomorrow with exactly what we have in 20,000, 25,000 square foot or 1 acre lots. And there's nothing that we can do about that, nor East Whiteland. That's the reality of it. Property owners have that ability to do it. We're looking at one additional option here tonight that again is still up in the air, and that's why we wanted to take the motion to authorize the staff to spend additional dollars with the consultants to develop this idea further. Now, you're shaking your head no. I'd be curious to hear what you think, ma'am. I mean, yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Can I make one comment?
Well, I have to go to the vote too. We all do. I have to be up at 7 o'clock.
Erin Gallagher, I'm from Jefferson Downs, and I've received a lot of miscommunication from you. Thorncroft, you say the easement isn't protected, I received from Mark Gordon. So, you know what, you're opening up a can of worms. That's what's going on here. No one wants this change. Again, the timing of this meeting, very suspicious too. No one brought that up. Half of you aren't even here. Your zoning person isn't here. But you had to rush this meeting. It's very suspicious. So yes, I will say that it's very disappointing that you heard people, but yet you want to spend more money, our money, on doing more plans. So yes, it's very, very disappointing. I've heard about these meetings. I'm here, and yes, very disappointed.
Ma'am, I'm just gonna say one thing and I'm gonna shut my mouth. You see my name out there. If you don't like me, don't vote for me when I come up for election.
Thank you.
If I were doing a building in your house, putting an addition on your house, and I gave you option 1, option 2, lady pick it. XYZ builder comes in, here's option 1, option 2, I spent some time, here's 4 options. If you're gonna spend $100,000, what would you like to do? You're gonna go with that builder that gave options. All as we're looking at with options, we're looking at one other option to see if it's feasible to save additional open space and to make it a nicer, don't shake your head till I'm done. I'm telling you, I've had it tonight with people in the negativity.
Well, I'm sorry,
We are looking for one more option so that we can make a decision.
But a lot of
I'm not
people
gonna
here said
say
they
it's
didn't
gonna
want
go
the
or not,
options,
we're
so that's what's
just looking
frustrating.
at the options.
Yes, and a lot of people came here tonight to say that we did not like the options.
And
we
I
don't like that.
appreciate that, and
So
I
you can't say that
understand
we're
that.
negative because we just disagree.
No,
We're allowed
what
to
I'm
our
saying
opinion,
is-
just like you are.
Let me finish, please.
Well, you didn't let me finish.
I held my tongue all night. All we're doing is getting one more option to look at the entire picture. There's no one in here that wants to do something that's going to detract from East Goshen Township. I want the full information of everything that's available. I'm not going to say I'm going to agree or disagree, but I want all the information. That is my charge as an elected official. I don't have information right now because all I have is like some sort of a concept. I need Tom Comita and the Planning Commission and others to put down what it might look like.
Yes,
and
that's what we need.
could
We
be
need to know
saved.
what the wetland breaks down in, what the historical is. your homework hasn't been done completely, I would say, because we need a lot of that information to know what is buildable, so then we have it. But you guys should have done that. You should have already done that. You shouldn't have come up and then
if we
said,
had
we're
done
gonna
that,
put this
ma'am,
here.
if we had done that, then you would have had the same innuendo tonight and saying, we didn't open it up to you at that point in
Well,
time.
no, you didn't open it up to the
What we have
whole
tried to
township,
do
though.
here
You
is give
didn't.
you an opportunity to have input in a public, open process that we want to continue.
And
It
that's-
is that simple.
Okay,
You
I think we can
elected-
tone down the anger
No,
from your end,
No,
because this
because
is
I'm saying
frustrating.
it from you, ma'am, and I have had
Okay.
it up to here
Mike,
as well. We
Mike,
are
back down a
trying to
second.
keep an open, transparent process and further
calm down.
Look, your blood pressure's too high.
We can
Now,
talk
wait a
about
minute,
Trump.
wait a minute, time out here.
Don't say that.
One of the things that we
Don't
realize,
say that.
one of the things that we realize
Don't say
is
that.
things don't work after 10 o'clock. Now, Ron, unless you have some earth-shattering thing to say,
Well, they
I'm,
need
I'm,
to-
I'm moving for adjournment because this is not going to go anywhere at the moment.
I was really just gonna make my own.
If you want to tell me afterwards, I'll be happy to see you. But, is there a motion for adjournment, please? David?
I motion to adjourn.
Well, we have to table the motion if we didn't vote. We didn't vote, so we either have to table the motion or we have to
I'll call
vote.
it a question. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
4-0, John. Okay, we'll get back to everybody when we got this information and can go from there. By the way, just so you know, there was about 100 people here today, maybe a little less. There's 18,500 people in East Goshen. We gotta make a decision for 18,500 people.
The vet, or where the link, or whatever they call it.
So, we need information to justify whatever we do to everybody.
Thank you, boss.
You're welcome. Okay, some days are tougher. We're going along really good there for once.